Hello, and welcome back to Dr. Hollowed. I'm John Panicola. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at people's creepiest let's get the hell out of here moments. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.
About 6 years ago, I was with my husband and two of his cousins around 1 a.m. We decided to go visit this haunted cemetery that was about a 30-minute drive from us, so we piled into my car. The closer we got to the cemetery, the worse I started to feel. Like my whole body was screaming at me to turn around and go back home. We finally made it and was just about to turn down the dirt road that led to the cemetery when, out of nowhere, my car died. At that point, I was already freaked out, and my husband and his cousins were just like, haha, that's weird. And you could feel anxiety start to settle into everyone. My husband restarted the car and turned down the little road, and the car died again. At this point, I am almost to tears, and I'm begging him to just turn around and go back home, and after the car randomly dying twice, he doesn't hesitate. The more distance that was put between us and the cemetery, the better I felt. Almost like this crushing weight was slowly being lifted off me. That night was the first and the last time my car had ever randomly died while driving. It was almost like something was trying to warn us or something. I don't know what would have happened if we had continued on into the cemetery, but I am glad as fuck that we didn't stick around to find out. I dabbled around with some chemical drugs in my 20s. I was over an acquaintance's apartment with a friend of mine and she was craving her daily dose of cocaine. When the order arrived, we did some. Suddenly and out of nowhere, her body flew straight down to the ground, flat as a pancake, and she had a violent seizure. I panicked and called 911 while it continued on for a minute or two. My life choices flashed before my eyes in that moment. I thought that she was going to die and that I was going to lose everything I had worked hard for from getting the blame for her death. When she came to, it was the weirdest, creepiest experience. It was a slow, disjointed return. She wasn't making complete sense but started walking around aimlessly as if nothing had happened. Doing very random things around the house. Her eyes were bugged out of her face. I had PTSD from this for a long time. Here's the update 10 plus years later. She's now my pharmacist, has 3 kids and seems to be doing great. But man, was that the scariest moment of my life to date. In Iraq, supporting another team wanting to meet and greet locals in a town square. My team was pulling perimeter security in the square and vehicles when all of a sudden, nowhere near prayer time, and without any call to prayer, the locals started rolling the town up. Moms were hustling their children inside and shopkeepers were locking up their stores. It was like a scene from a western right before a shootout. Had to pull rank on the other team leader and insist we leave the area quickly. Later got word from intel sources that we had just missed being hit by a numerically superior force. Same city, different day, realized we were being hemmed in on all sides by vehicles at a stoplight and we had really tall buildings all around us that started looking ominous. Ordered my driver to push the vehicle in front of us out of the way with the crash bumper enough that we could jump the median and get out of the area. Last vehicle in the convoy was just passing through the intersection just as we started taking fire from the rooftops. A friend and I were walking past a strip mall on the outskirts of Miami at night. The only storefront that was open/active so late was a bar, and we happened to cross paths with a small group of men who were approaching its entrance. As we passed them, I had a powerful intuition that I must, at all costs, avoid making eye contact with one of the men. I kept my head down, and because I was looking towards the ground, I observed that he was wearing an ankle monitor. I don't know what his deal was, but I have never, before or since, encountered someone who emanated such a dangerous vibe just through the simple act of walking. My friend agreed and said she was shuddering as he passed us. So it was back in a village in Bangladesh and it was January 2009, weather is very cold. Me and a couple of my cousins and relatives went out for a walk during nighttime. So we were passing by this road and on the right side of the road there were bushes and trees and was heavily dark, and on the left side there was just a pond and surrounding the pond was filled with trees. So my cousins crossed the road from the right side to the left and I was the last person about to cross. What I saw on my right side through the bushes was a dark hooded figure, sort of like a Dementor-ish, looking straight at me. What's weird was when I step 1 foot front the figure goes back, and when I take a foot back it comes towards me. Terrified, I crossed the road and trailed behind my cousins and was following them. I turned my head leftwards towards the pond and guess what? It was the same hooded figure staring at me. This time I was scared and literally ran towards my cousins and told them whether they see any weird looking creature staring from the pond. They looked at the pond and said there is nobody there. That was one hell of a terrifying experience I had as a child. I was climbing with a friend in the French Alps. Early in the morning, with the sun barely rising on the horizon. We were climbing a slab crossing from an icefield to another icefield. We heard heavy sounds of something falling, but, since the mountains were surrounding us like a funnel, there was no way of telling what was falling, where it was falling from and, most importantly, where was it falling to. We both looked at each other, panicking, no knowing where to go to, and started rushing to a place that seemed somewhat safe. After what seemed like an eternity, we saw chunks of seracs, ice blocks, falling above us, luckily not onto us. Unfortunately, 3 alpinists, all roped up, were in the path of the ice cubes. The one at the bottom got hit by a serac the size of a small fridge and popped like a cork. The second alpinist was pulled by his falling friend and started falling as well, pulling the last climber down. Somehow, he held them both. As everything calmed down, we both rushed to the first climber that fell. He was concussioned and was injured on his left leg, needing us to walk properly. We got him to what seemed a safe spot and started checking his injuries. The last climber told us to get to another spot because he thought we were still in the way of falling seracs. We moved him to another spot and, 2 minutes later, our first spot was bombarded by the upper icefield. After patching up both injured climbers, the one that held them was perfectly fine somehow. We waited with them for the helicopter to get them to safety. February 2020. I was driving across the country by myself, moving from Rhode Island all the way to Los Angeles in order to pursue a television career. I made a 2-week road trip out of my drive and took the southern route. Fast forward to when I reached bumfuck, middle of nowhere Central Texas. It was about 5 p.m., the sun was on its way out and sunset was dimming. I had to piss like my life depended on it, so I told myself the next side street I see I'll pull off and do it there. I did just that. On said side street it was a pretty simple layout. The right side was this wide open, what looked to be field on someone's cattle farm, while on the left side there was a ran down looking house that was mostly covered by this huge shrub. I pulled my car, a Honda Civic Coupe, alongside said shrub, got out, and positioned myself towards it so I could commence in urinating. As soon as I assumed the position, though, I heard noise. A ruffling noise, something scraping against the asphalt in the distance. I shit you not, I looked to my right, further down the same street I pulled down, and there were 3 fully grown pit bulls all in formation next to one another. I'm talking between 80 to 100 pounds each dog. These were mean looking, wild, no collar/signs of ownership, ready to eat me doggos. They all had their sights on me simultaneously as I frantically stared them down. They were grouped up no more than 100 feet away from me. When I tell you I genuinely feared for my life, I couldn't express my emotional state in a better way. I became totally numb, and for the first time in my life my brain was in pure survival mode. I didn't even zipper/button up, I dashed to my car immediately upon digesting the situation. The dogs wasted absolutely no time doing the same towards me, only 10x faster than I. I hop in the driver's seat, lock the doors, as if dogs are capable of opening car doors, or any doors for that matter, and begin attempting to turn my car around. 2 of the dogs were scraping the living shit out of my driver door while the third mounted its front legs on the hood of my car. All 3 were barking their lives at me. Holy moly, I could taste my adrenaline. I conducted what was probably a 15-point turn just so I could avoid severely injuring/killing one of these dogs, and when I had the straightaway available to the main road, I stomped on the gas. I shit you not, up to almost 25 miles per hour, these dogs were side by side with my car, chasing me as if they were going to eat my entire vehicle. I lost all urge to do anything for a long while after that. I did not exit my vehicle until I arrived in Arlington that night. I peed inside my car in a used Chick-fil-A cup. Fuck that. 7 years ago I was a stupid teenager. It was 3 a.m., I was walking home from a birthday party. I was alone because the dude that was supposed to walk with me said he was too tired. I run into some football fans, they were really nice, gave me a cigarette and walked with me for a while. Then, when I was alone, this order dude approached me. Offered a cig, I thanked him. But suddenly I got this really bad gut feeling. He asked where I was going. I said my dad is waiting for me at home. He followed me. Then he asked if I want to earn some money. I firmly and loudly said no. He asked if I have any friends that would want to. No. I started to walk very quickly. I was just 2 minutes away from home. And then he started running towards me at full speed. I run and called my dad. Told him to go outside and get me. Dude heard it and stopped. He yelled, "Will we meeting again?" I was scared out of my mind, and sometimes I wonder what could have happened if I wasn't so close to my house. Back in the late 90s, my boyfriend at the time and I went down to New Orleans for spring break and then drove over to FL for the second half of the week. We stopped at some shitty hotel for the night somewhere on the Florida Panhandle. The next morning while packing up the car, some guy started chatting us up who was close to our age, and he seemed nice enough, and he asked if he could join us for breakfast, so we said yes. Within 10 minutes we knew we had made a terrible mistake. The guy was a horrible racist and was making very rude comments about our waitress because she was Italian, which my boyfriend was half Italian, and used extremely racist language like it was nothing. I then noticed a small swastika tattoo on his hand. Don't know that I have ever eaten a meal so fast in my life. Visiting my mother's family as a kid, they used to live on a farm. The best way to get back from there was to catch 3:30 a.m. train from the village station, which was about 3-4 km away from the farm. They didn't own a car back then, had to walk all the way with the luggage. We woke up at 2:30 and left. My uncle and aunt decided to come with us to the station as it was winters, a little foggy and dark. So it was my mother, my sister, my aunt, my uncle and I. The ladies were walking in the front with Unc and I walking about 15 feet behind with all the luggage. Walking through a narrow unpaved road with fields all around, quiet, dark, but just enough bright to see the way. As we are walking, I see two ladies walking up to my mom and others from a field to the left. I didn't think much of it as I thought people get up early in villages, must be someone known going to the station as well, and decided to pair up. I got busy talking with Unc and didn't bother about the ladies. After about 5 minutes or so, the ladies parted ways towards the fields on the left side. I still didn't think much of it. After reaching the station, I asked my mom about the ladies and she said, "What ladies?" I said, "The two who were walking beside you." I explained in detail about the clothes they were wearing, as I didn't see their faces. She didn't understand, she thought I was trying to scare her. My uncle rubbished the whole thing. They thought I was trying to prank them. So, I let it go. We reached our home at around 7 a.m. My mom called Uncle after reaching and he told her that they are still at the railway station, waiting for the sun to come up. He saw them too and he knew who they were. He didn't want me to get scared, that's why I didn't say anything then. I have a sister and had a foster sister. For the sake of anonymity, we'll call my biological sister Angela and my former foster sister Heather. They're both younger than me, I'm 22. At the time of the incident they were 15 and 17. We were out and about in the South End. Not the best part of town but not a bad place, definitely not Compton stature. Was a nice day and we were headed to a local park to go roller skating. We were busing there. We live in a major city with a pretty good transit system, not as good as NYC but still pretty good. We had to transfer buses at a transit station and there was a guy, maybe mid-30s early 40s, already at the stop. He approached Angela and Heather saying things like, "Hey, let me get your number," or "Hey, where you both heading today?" Routine catcalling stuff. Heather responded something like, "Stop bothering us / stop following us." We sat down at the bench and kept standing near us. We made eye contact. I gave him a kick rocks nod and a get out of here gesture. Now, I'm not a short guy. 5'9", maybe 5'10" on a good day. I'm not short but I'm lanky. Not really in a great position to fight someone. Said catcaller made a move for his hip, presumably for a gun or large knife. Angela and Heather both bolted to another bay in the transit station, to run and hide, definitely smart on their part. Leaving me on the bench in the booth with the guy blocking my exit. He started taunting me and saying menacing things to me. I stayed on the bench to de-escalate. There was no way I was going to overpower him and get away unscathed. It was a lot of yes/no answers. Tell him what he wants to hear and he won't kill you. What I didn't know is at the same time, Angela was going around telling the other bus drivers in the station, "Help. Help. My brother is in danger." Finally a transit manager, older black man, came over already recording. "Hey, you better stop harassing these kids. I'm recording and we'll turn it over to the police. The police are on their way." Heather came over behind the transit manager and started berating the guy. Finally the transit manager turned around to me and Heather and said, "If you don't get, Heather, I'ma let him after you, i.e. stop escalating the situation, Heather." The guy eventually gave up and walked off. I work as a private contractor. Was working an overnight security gig in the middle of a large South Texas ranch near the border. Me and my partner for the night had been patrolling for hours with nothing happening. Stopped for a few minutes to talk to each other and heard some cracking in the brush. Flipped down our nods and saw an IR light moving through the brush, then freeze and vanish. Obviously we couldn't leave the job site, so we sat in painful silence for hours, rifles on the brush line. Never saw or heard anything else. Fucking chills though. Theoretically no one else should have been running equipment like that in our area, and yet. It was that big planetary conjunction that happened a few years back. I wanted to view it, but it was very low on the horizon, so I figured I'd go across the road to the big suburban park with my binoculars. It was only about 9 p.m., But the sun had gone down and it was very dark in the park because all the big boundary trees blocked out the light from the streetlights. I looked at the conjunction for maybe 5 minutes or less before I got hit with that skin-crawling get the fuck out of here feeling and just bolted without thinking about it. I dropped my phone and hurriedly scrambled around the grass to find it, grabbed it and ran full speed back home. I have no idea why I felt that way. My brain probably spotted something I didn't properly process and survival instinct took over. There wasn't any big, dangerous animals around, unless you count ducks and ibises. This was just a relatively large recreational park in the middle of suburban Australia. That park also had a semi-dead tree that was perpetually burning on the inside. Like, literally for months and without smoke. It was a strange park, for sure. Was on a spring break trip with one of my best friends and a couple of his buddies out at his dad's house, out on Kentucky Lake. Part of the deal of us staying there was to help around the property. There was a huge tree they had felled earlier that week that needed disposing of. The scraps we used to make a fire later that night. We're a decent way into the night, no idea what time it was. It was just the four of us, sitting in the back. Friend's dad is in the house, about 50 yards away. It's that point in the night where people are trading war stories. I'm just sitting there, zoning out, staring into the fire. The dudes are yucking it up, laughing. I hear an owl off in the distance, but close enough to hear it clearly. It's directly on the other side of the house, I'd estimate another 100 yards or so. Nice touch. It was an amazing night. No wind. Clear skies. Good company. Away from all the hubbub. The fire was comforting. The company pleasant. The perfect time to let all the worldly worries slip by. I hear the owl again. But this time, something answered its call, somewhere to the left of the house. Nobody else shows signs of hearing it, continuing on with the stories. Maybe my imagination. I calm myself, staring back into the fire. The owl hoots. The thing answers. This time everyone heard it. The fire went silent. Everyone looked into each other's eyes, searching for some explanation as to what it was we heard. For some kind of comfort, but there was none. We sat, in silence, for what seemed ages. The dad must have noticed us pipe down, because he walked down from the house. He asked us what was up, what we were doing. None of us answered. The owl hooted. The thing replied. What the hell was that? He says. It was a strange feeling. Awful and curious. Without missing a beat. With no words. No panicked expressions. Every one of us stood up, and walked directly to the house. Some primal switch was hit, where every single one of us knew we shouldn't be where we were anymore. I was 16 and going to meet my friends at the beach. Unfortunately, there was a pretty high human trafficking rate in the area, but I still wasn't afraid to be out on my own. I stopped at the local grocery store to get a bag of ice to throw in the cooler that I brought. I got to my car and two men got out of a truck a few spots down. They just stood there and watched me walk in. They followed me around the store and stood at their truck again when I came out. I threw the bag in the cooler and one of them asked if I needed help. I ignored them. I got back in my car and they immediately got back in their truck. They followed me out of the parking lot and around town for about 15 minutes. Luckily I grew up in that town and I knew it like the back of my hand, so I was making stupid turns every few blocks. I called my friends and told them the situation, but I lost the two men while I was on the phone. Never saw them again. Had a good day at the beach. When I was about 7, me and my brother used to make pillow forts in one of our rooms that would be pretty extensive. One night I woke up to cabinets in my bathroom slamming right down the hall. I thought maybe it was my bro. He slept with his head covered under the blanket. I was damn terrified but figured it had to have been him and checked the bathroom and nothing was there. It was the middle of the night and I thought maybe bro was on the computer downstairs or something. Nobody down there. I got terrified. Went back to the fort and laid down, heard the slamming for a while till I had to dang check. I opened the bathroom cabinet and somehow my damn cat was stuck in there pawing at the door from the inside, opening it and it would slam shut. She ran out of there and made my heart almost leap out my chest. I was convinced there was a demon or some shit. This young boy was relieved and a little humored. A couple of friends and I were hiking Devil's Bridge in Sedona and we stayed a bit too long and the sun started to set, leaving us the only people in the trail. It was dark by the time we got back down to the main trail, but still light enough to see. I usually gravitate to the back of the group while walking, so I was maybe 20 feet or so behind just looking up at the night sky. I don't know what possessed me to turn around, but I did and I saw probably the biggest mountain lion I've ever seen. They're only supposed to get around 150 pounds but I swear this thing was well over 200. I yell at it because that's what you're supposed to, and puffed myself up to try to look bigger. Kitty didn't care at all and it gets low. I loudly tell my group to keep going and I pull out my carry gun. Whole time this cat hasn't moved. I start backing up, and it just turns and jumps into the brush. I keep backing up thinking about the clever girl scene from Jurassic Park, and when I hear the rustling and twigs snapping stop, I turn and jog back to the group. We all have a good laugh about it and stop to catch our breath, and at this point it's dark. We're still somewhat alert, so we keep heading back to the car quickly. My buddy has to pee, so he steps off to the side, maybe about 3 feet into the brush. This time I stay with the rest of the group, but I'm turned around back the way we came. To my left I see my buddy flick his flashlight on for a second and yell, so I turn and look. Now from behind me I hear a low growl that sounds exactly like the predator, so I turn around again, and at this point it's just getting ridiculous. Next thing I know, my buddy fires 2 shots, so I just turn back towards the cars and run, following the group and my buddy, who's frantically trying to show his dick back in his pants while holding his gun. I guess where he stepped off he was damn near face to face with a different cougar with his dick out, so he panic fired 2 shots. About 10 years ago, myself and 2 friends stopped at a gas station to get snacks and drinks. They both went inside and I waited in the car since I wasn't getting anything. As soon as they went inside, I saw a man walking in the direction of our car. He looked to be maybe homeless, and was definitely under the influence of something. His eyes were bloodshot and he looked angry. He started circling the car while making hard eye contact with me. It felt very threatening. He then walked into the gas station, stood by the door inside the store for maybe 10 seconds, then walked back out and stood outside the door. He continued to glare at me for a moment, then went inside again. He continued to go inside and outside the front door about 3 times. When he came outside the last time, he made a wide circle around the car again, glaring at me the whole time. My friends finally came back to the car and I told them we needed to get out of there. I pointed out the man and told them how he had been circling the car. We pulled out of there pretty fast. Thankfully nothing happened, but it was pretty intense having someone glare at you in such a hateful way. About 12 years ago, my friends and I stumbled upon a World War II bunker that was open with a blowtorch. These bunkers were welded shut, but somehow someone melted the welds and got in. These bunkers are common along the Pacific coast in the San Francisco Bay Area. This one was in Malagra Ridge near the Nike missile site. My friends and I decided to go into one of these bunkers after sundown. When we got in, there was a ladder that led deeper into the bunker. We decided to go deeper. Once we got into the lower chamber, I used my phone flashlight and we found something creepy AF. There were ceremonial satanic runes and symbols painted on the walls and on the ground. In the middle of one rune, there were dead animals. As soon as my flashlight revealed the dead animals, one of my homies booked it out of that place. Someone was definitely holding some rituals or trying to summon demons. Or something along those lines. It was creepy AF and we all got out of there hella fast. A week later, the Rangers shut the opening by welding it back together. When I was a senior, I was living in Taiwan on an exchange program. I was the only one in our program, which included like a couple dozen or so other kids from different parts of the world that spoke the language, so it wasn't unheard of for me to be the group liaison when we got together, especially for the kids traveling from smaller, more rural cities than the others. I had flagged down a cab for me and a couple other girls my age so we could meet up with the others at a beach. Immediately upon hailing one, I had an uneasy feeling with the cab driver, but chalked it up to nothing too unusual. Just probably an older cab driver that hailed from the countryside, and like many of the older men there, he chewed betel nut, which is a crude form of tobacco easily found over there that turns your mouth and teeth bright red, and sure, he was a little rough around the edges, holes in his shirt, smelled a little funky in the small car, and he wasn't wearing shoes, which some much older rural people don't, so his feet were pretty dirty and both his toe and fingernails were comically long and stained yellow, but I had seen senior-aged folks in the countryside like that and they were friendly enough, not harmful in any way. I just was a little surprised he was in that condition driving a cab was all. The real red flag was he was purposefully speaking very fast and muttering under his breath some weird things. At first, to test the waters, I asked him to please speak a little slower, but he laughed and mumbled even faster that we were stupid, young white foreigners. That we had no idea what he was saying and it wasn't very smart for such small girls to travel alone. I awkwardly half smiled and just said, I understand you, but I'm a little uncomfortable. He pointed to the sign on the back of the driver's seat, which is really common in cabs over there, basically customer service and safety information and over dramatically enunciated, see this? No worries. I'm good. I was almost relieved until he mumbled quickly afterwards about how little I actually could comprehend and wouldn't be able to know if we were in danger or not. I said again, what do you mean by that? And instead of missing a beat, he said, see if you can understand this. Anyone can have that paper in a car, but you don't actually know who I am. I could show you my ID, but how would you know it's mine? Even if it is. What if I don't actually work for the company you call? What would you do about it? See? I'm trying to help you. But I'm talking too fast again, so good luck if you catch what I'm meaning. This whole time the other two girls with me had puzzled looks on their faces and were trying to gauge the situation through my facial expressions and body language. I just kind of glanced over and said in English something off. I think we should pull over. The cab driver looked irritated and demanded to know what I said. I just said I made a mistake. Gave him the wrong destination and actually our friends were meeting right here. He made a weird face and scoffed at me saying this isn't anywhere close to the beach, but I was adamant I'm so sorry, you're right. I am confused and still have a lot to learn. This was the spot. And I pointed to the closest landmark with a sign. I think it may have been a park or something. It was kind of out of the way of everything else, but at least there was a couple people there. He tried a few different times to sound warmer and apologize and say it would be safer for us to stay in the ride with him. But once we were pulling up he got agitated again and started with mumbling insults quickly. I had already texted our other friends to go to this location because there was a couple guys in that group and just said something like we felt unsafe in our cab, change of plans, meet here. Last ditch effort I shouted out the window to the couple strangers at the park, hi. We're here. And they looked up enough just to kind of see me waving and politely waved back. I told the cab driver that's our friends, see? And that's when he unlocked the door. We bolted out and didn't look back. Meanwhile I called our friends to see where they were and they showed up a while later. We all ended up just walking to the beach, which was about a half hour away by foot, but was better than taking our chances so soon after the freaky cab incident. Lamau's sorry story turned out a lot longer than expected, but I'm in too deep now, so. Anyways, thankfully that was the only experience I had like that, and it's in no way a reflection on Taiwan as a whole, because I felt way safer there generally speaking than in America. It was just, like I said, a freaky one-off scenario and I'm glad we ended up safe and sound. Now, whether that guy was actually malicious or not? I think there was something definitely wrong with him, not saying he would have killed us, but something untoward could have happened to us in the least. He never did show me his ID, so couldn't even call the cab company to inquire about him, just kind of left it as is and was a lot more careful about reading the situation beforehand when picking cabs in the future. Oof, 3 days into college in a not so great area, my new roommate and I wanted to go to the local Humane Society. We were followed by an older, bigger guy, for a good 10 to 12 blocks. I mean, this dude was attempting to hide behind the trees that line the city sidewalks whenever we stopped. Luckily we ran into a welcome group of probably 15 other kids from the school. Happened to be our RA running it and we told him what happened. We merged into the group and luckily nothing happened. We didn't get to go to the Humane Society, but we were just happy to get away. Who knows what would have happened. A group of my buddies and I from middle school into college all had our separate or connected incidents with this dude Kyle, who had been expelled from public schooling in 8th grade for stabbing kids in the lunchroom with hypodermic needles, and alongside other violent incidents he'd had in or around us, he had threatened to gut me and some of those friends outside of his ex-girlfriend's house that my friend was now dating. So, it's been well established we hate this guy and he hates us, and we show up to a party he's at. We're all sticking to our side of the party, and he's on his side, until he walks over to us. And says, hey guys, I don't expect you to ever forgive me, but I went through a lot of shit and want you to know I have no hard feelings with any of you. We didn't really say much, but didn't forgive him. About 10 seconds after he walks past us, the power completely went out where we were, and someone let out a blood-curdling scream. All of my friends and I just booked it even though we couldn't see shit. We obviously assumed he'd stabbed one of us. When the lights came back on, we were all scattered all across the room trying to get the hell out. Turns out it was someone else completely unrelated just playing a joke, and the scream was by another random person. They had no idea about stabby guy. He laughed and said, shit, yeah, I guess you guys thought I was gonna stab you, huh? I guess I'll get out of here. And we never saw him again. I met a guy at a bar who was sitting alone, I was too, and I was buzzed enough to start talking to him about a tattoo of his that caught my eye. We talked and he seemed super chill and we had some common interests. He was about my age. We were both flirty and horny with each other playfully. We decided to make out in his car and left the bar. I was vibing with him and we were going to make out for a bit and exchange numbers and go our separate ways. It was probably around 1 AM anyway. The second we got in his car he was like a different person. I don't want to go into a ton of detail, but it like wasn't enough for him that I was willing to make out / fool around but didn't want to fuck. I'd also just worked an 8-hour shift before going to that bar after work and felt gross. He tried immediately pushing my boundaries in forceful, aggressive and threatening ways. I lied about leaving something in the bar and had to lie about how I couldn't wait to come back and do things with him. I noped out of there, called an Uber, and he blew up my phone with texts and calls for hours. I finally blocked, had already muted it, and yeah. I have made poor judgment calls when drunk, and I can distinctly remember the fight or flight instinct the moment he started trying to force me to do stuff, and one of the strongest fears of my life just kicked in and I had to dip. Though drunk, I remember clearly his personality when at the bar, gaining my trust / in public, versus once we were alone in his car. I've never met someone that suddenly, all at once seemed terrifying to me. Wife and I took a trip to Hawaii. Figured out if we spent the night in LA before the final leg to Hawaii we could save about $1,000. Lovely. We find the cheapest hotel near LAX we could find. When we land we spend the evening in Santa Monica and Uber back to our place. Scary motel. Bulletproof glass to check in, sketchy as fuck. We get into our room and we both remark that we were glad we only had to be there a few hours before our flight. It's a small space but with solid blackout curtains, the bed is horrible and the carpet is stained with God knows what. We button up for the night and it's literally pitch black in the room, a blessing. About 1 a.m. both my wife and I wake up simultaneously, for no reason. I can feel something standing over her side of the bed. My wife starts screaming like I had never heard her scream. I snap my head over to her side of the bed and, even in the pitch black, there's the outline of a tall man, even darker than the black of the room. I can't describe the chill that ran down my spine, but it was like nothing I'd ever felt till or since. It was a clear outline of man holding a knife over my wife, an outline of deeper black than the blackness of the room. He was a lefty, and he wanted to do her harm. In about 25 seconds I jumped to my feet and with all my strength, threw myself into this blacker blackness, across the bed. I crashed into the wall and put a dent into the drywall. My wife was screaming so loud there was now banging on the walls from the other tenants. I flipped on the light, expecting to see at least a 6 feet 3 inches guy that had dodged my tackle, but there was no one there. The hair on my neck was standing straight up and my heart was racing faster than I can remember. After a few minutes of calming my wife down she said, "Left hand, knife?" I nodded and we packed our shit and spent the night in the lax parking lot. I had always wanted to have something I couldn't explain happen, but after that, I'm good. I spent 2 tours in Iraq and many firefights, but I've never been as freaked out as that shitty motel. I don't know what the fuck happened, but I'll never go within 10 miles of that place again. I was once with my girlfriend by a river watching the capybaras swimming. They were really cute and had little pups with them, so we were just so comfortable and happy watching them go around looking for some plants to eat. Then I watched as one of them got out of the water and kind of sprinted to some woods about 30 meters away from us. I had the impression that this particular capybara didn't really care for me and that she was keeping her eye on us as she sprinted to those woods, so I talked to my girlfriend about this and she brushed it off and called me a paranoid. But that weird feeling persisted. Then, a few seconds later, this capybara emerged from the woods about 15 meters away, running directly at us. It was no longer a cute animal in a river. It was a giant, bloodthirsty rat who was coming for our lives. We ran like a couple of people who were being chased by an assassin rodent, and thank God that beast gave up on her chase because she would certainly have caught up with us. Lesson learned: when capybaras are with their pups, they can become my greatest nightmare. Highway 6, Nevada, headed east on my Honda Rebel 250, alone. Left the last town, an old mining village, with a full tank, all 2 gallons, and an extra gallon strapped to the back in the early afternoon. Past a sign that declared 168 miles to the next service station. Sky went from perfect blue to rose to purple over endless scrub and dust, buttes occasionally casting long shadows over the road. Wild Mustangs picking their way through the grass, foals following behind. I didn't see another car or person or structure for 160 miles, the only evidence of human life was the endless barbed wire and the highway. It was one of the most gorgeous rides of my life, and I don't have a single picture, because I didn't stop once. There was a bone-deep dread that kept both my hands on the bars, like if I stopped I would die. TripAdvisor will call Highway 50 the loneliest road in America. I disagree. Was traveling east of Yosemite without plans, got to a dead-end campground at the edge of a forest around dusk and decided to check it out. It was fairly flat and open, there were a few long-term campers situated at one end, the other end was empty. We headed toward the empty end because who doesn't like privacy? I saw this one site that was tucked down further than the others, down against a creek, it seemed like the perfect spot. Good, largish flat space, semi-hidden, water sounds. We were excited to claim the space. Took a step or 2 down into the actual site and got a chill so hard and deep I literally scrambled back to the car. It was like walking into a change of temperature or something, a real, noticeable and alarming difference, but not definable to me as a simple five senses thing. Like to think I'm fairly level-headed, but luckily I know I'm an animal in the end and trusted instincts save lives. We left, drove to a different spot entirely, and despite unpacking in the dark, had a really nice wake up the next morning to a beautiful field of sparkling frost. I'm so glad my meat sack spoke up. Who knows what happened in that other spot. I was in Montana on my first job as senior engineer for a computer deployment at a school in the Northeast. We were finishing up at the first school and left to drive back towards the mountains for our next school. Being a city boy, I wasn't used to planning for gas stops. I just wait till the light comes on and take the next exit. I realized when we were in the middle of nowhere that we only had 40 miles left in the tank. We could either go back the wrong way where we knew there was gas, or we could keep going and hope we find somewhere along the way. We decided to chance it, but kept passing small villages of under 500 people with no gas stations. We turned into one of them to check and pulled up to a diner, but there were no lights on and no one inside. We went down the street to the post office and it was the same. Mind you, this was at 3 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. We pulled ahead and parked on the main drag, got out and took a look around. That was when we noticed there were no people. There were shops and restaurants along the street and cars parked up and down the street, but no people. No pedestrians, no moving cars, no one in their yards. It was like the beginning of the movie Phantoms. Once that clicked, we hopped back into the truck and burned rubber so quick I never even looked back to see the name of the town. Fortunately, we found a bar a few miles down and they gave us directions to the next gas station. I will never forget how creepy it felt in that moment. Not mine, but a very good late friend of mine, that I trust. My friend is an avid hunter/outdoorsman. Literally born in the wrong era, like should have been a mountain man. He had his honey hole hunting spot. Every year he would go hunting there, and get the biggest D4 dun bucks I've seen. He loved this spot so much he would never tell anyone where it was. Well, one day we are all hanging out and he mentions that he has a new hunting spot. This is not normal.fpr him, so we ask why he decided to switch, and he tells us this story. He gets to his spot, all is normal. Sets up his camp and sets out to scout the area. As he's walking he smells something he's never smelt before. This guy knows this area and literally lives in a cabin in the woods. For him to smell something he's never smelt before is kinda a big deal. He shrugs it off and keeps hiking around. He said he kept feeling like he was being watched or stalked, almost what he would expect a deer to feel as he's hunting it. It got to the point where he decided to head back to his camp and call it a night. When he got to his truck he found prints he had never seen before all around his truck and camp. He left and never went back, and the look on his face as he told the story was like none I've ever seen on him. He later found a new spot that he disclosed right before passing away, that I'll be hunting with my dad next season. Realizing that someone intended to do great harm to me and my friend. Thought we were cool and lived in a town of 13,000 people in the Midwest. We thought we were hot stuff. I was 13 and partying, drinking, smoking weed. Decided I wanted to be like Mike and move weight. The absolute first time we tried to do a big buy. We rode our bikes out of town. To where my buddy had talked to our dealer and said we wanted a bigger buy. Literally biking on a gravel road out in BF North Dakota. We get to this shop. For reference, especially in the Midwest, people purchase land and build a big storage shed aka shop, and literally sometimes it's just a shop with a yard light out in the middle of nowhere. We got to the shop at like 5. I told my dad I was going to the fair, which led us to leaving early for the pickup. Wick was out on the edge of town. My dad pulled been like, no, you aren't going to the fair at 9 p.m. Now me being this punk kid. Not for 1 second was I scared to go out to this place. My dumbass didn't think for a second about how dangerous this was. I had $500 from selling something off of every eighth we went in on. Not once did I think this was stupid. We were there and waited in for hours, and it's pitch black besides the yard light, no stars, cloudy night. Well, my buddy suggested we put our bikes on the side of the building, so we walked them over, and as we got around the edge of the building we noticed headlights coming from the north. For reference, the front of the shop faced south, yard light further south, only entrance is from the south. The shop is surrounded by non-tilled prairie. I'd if it was CRP or not, but it wasn't agriculture. All of a sudden the headlights we see pull west and shut off. To this day I don't know why my buddy told me to lie down. He said lie down and I didn't question it. 3 seconds later we hear people talking and crunching through prairie. These guys have to be less than 20 feet away. I remember I could hear one breathing. At this point I'm confused as fuck as to why I'm lying on the ground and 2 dudes parked in a weird spot. It didn't hit me until they didn't go into the yard light. From where we were, these guys were posted to the east side of the yard light and we were on the east side of the shop. Then another car is coming from the west and turns into the yard directly into the light. It's our dealer. He got out of the car. Kind of posts up on the tailgate and checks his phone. Hops off the car and goes, "You guys here?" Two other dude come walking out into the yard light with weapons in their hands. I'd be a liar if I told you I knew exactly what they had, but we could see them holding objects long in their hands. That's when it hit me. Up until then I thought maybe because we were doing a nefarious deal that they were being cautious. Nope, they wanted to me and my friend up and take our money. When he said "you guys here," I grabbed my friend and kind of tugged him to say like he's talking to us, "Let's go," but he grabbed my arm so hard his nails made me bleed. Something was screaming to him to stay hidden and my alarm was not working. But for that 45 minutes we lied dead still, and once the gig was up and I saw those guys, my body pumped adrenaline into me like it's never done before. My body screamed, "Get the F out there now," but we sat there and waited until they left. I wish I could tell you some stuff they said to each other or anything like that. But I was lying chest down for 45 minutes till those guys left. It was the longest ride home. I was worried that because we didn't show that our dealer was gonna come find us. But that weekend he got arrested for beating a 13-year-old so bad he had to go to Mayo to get his face reconstructed. The worst part is he was super nice to us when we bought weed from him. Like he was cool and would even buy us Taco Bell. Found out from some old cronies he's in prison for life because he was connected to the cartel and they skinned some guy alive in Bismarck. My friend didn't make it to 16. He killed himself in some suicide pact from treatment. That night I found out I didn't have what it took to be a real drug dealer, so I kind of just stopped. I'm sure they would have killed us. Or worse. So, I've never had a really scary experience, but I did have an experience once where I went into panic mode and all I could think of was escaping the situation. I had this friend in college who really liked to drink. She had a big ass house to herself, so we'd drink together a lot. One night we were outside smoking and one of her neighbors comes up the driveway to his door and is chatting with my friend. Eventually he invites us over for drinks and gaming. He shares the house with another guy. They're both young military guys. We're there a while, have a few drinks, played Worms on the 360 and they got to show off their entertainment setup, which for the time was enviable. They were really cool guys. We're shooting the shit and one gets up and just says, "Be back in a second." He leaves for a minute or two and then comes back. He walks in the room and stands facing the other guy who also stands up. They are there just staring intensely at one another for a while and things are real awkward. My friend and I are wrapped. Then the one who had left reaches down, unzips his pants and whips out his cock. I'm going to preface this by saying I have no problem with LGBTQ+. I don't care what any other consenting adults do in their free time, but I don't exactly want a front row seat. As the other guy proceeds to get into a kneeling position I am in a full-on panic. I'm grasping at my friend, whisper talking, "Nat please, we have to leave." She stares slack-jawed, unmoving. I'm just about to start climbing over the couch to escape when the guy kneeling firmly grasps the other dude's shaft and then yanks the whole thing right out. Then proceeds to stick the most realistic, rubber dick you have ever seen to his forehead by a suction cup at its base and the two of them laugh uncontrollably. I lost many a night to a booze-filled blackout with that friend of mine, but I will never forget that in 100 years. In college some buddies of mine and I developed the habit of walking the train tracks at night. It was peaceful and usually quiet, a good way to get away from campus and its baggage and talk. One night me and one friend went further down the line than usual. Without realizing it we'd gotten well out of the city and into the woods. We continue on for a little while, most of the lights were gone, and there was brush and trees all around us, with a small trailer home just visible ahead. Suddenly, without a word we both stopped dead in our tracks, overwhelmed with a completely unspoken feeling of being both watched and in extreme danger. We wait and listen, and hearing nothing but the wind and the tall grass around us, we both hurriedly agree it's time to turn back. We keep a quick pace for about 10 minutes, hyper alert and constantly listening for any strange sounds or movement. The whole trip still engulfed in a pervasive sense of near panic at this unseen sense of danger. Bear in mind that we are both typically very difficult to rattle. Finally we clear the trees and get back to what we call the junction, an intersection of two tracks with a switcher near some warehouses, and also where there is significant light again. We make it about 100 yards into this area after our 10 minutes or so of speed walking and, feeling no less in danger, but a need to investigate, we pause to assess the situation on open and reasonably well lit ground. To this day I can see the silhouette just barely visible, standing barely beyond the edge of the light in the gap between the two tracks, staring directly at us. We walked those tracks many times, so what I saw wasn't the trick of unfamiliar terrain. To this day it still gives me chills. We moved very quickly the remainder of the way back to campus, the feeling of extreme danger only slowly fading once we got well back onto campus. I've never been able to shake that sight, or the strangeness of the unspoken but simultaneous sense of extreme danger we were both overwhelmed by. Went camping by myself in 2009 in the Glendora Mountains in California to see a place called A Bridge to Nowhere. I was 7 miles and never saw another soul on the way, and so get to a spot I like, pitch my tent and dig a small pit to make a small fire to cook with and some food and get ready to sleep. So skip ahead a few hours, around 2 am I wake up to piss like racehorse and I walk a few feet away. I get the feeling I'm not alone, like all the hairs on my neck stand up and I get the chills big time when I hear a roar that fills the canyon to the point that every fucking thing shuts up and goes silent. Every cricket and bird stopped making noise and the whole place fell silent like a bomb just went off, and then I hear it, the sound of something running down the canyon in complete darkness. Every footfall louder than previous ones, getting closer till sounds like it's just feet from, and it stops. Mind, I'm fucking shaking like a leaf and have no clue what it is, cause it stopped just outside the range of my gas lantern, and just like that the whole can came back to life. I went back to tent trembling and scared shitless. I never sleep that night and I never went back to visit the Bridge to Nowhere trial in Azusa Canyon. I used to be a Jehovah's Witness as a kid. That thing where they go around knocking on doors to preach to you. I was doing that with my mom and a few others. We walked up this slanted driveway with trees around each side. They couldn't see my mom and I from the street in the car. We knocked on the door, everything very normal. The man answered the door, still seems normal. Except this time I got hit by something I couldn't see. My ears started ringing and buzzing like crazy. It felt like a helmet had been put on. My body was screaming at me to leave. The man listened to my mom's intro, then said he was interested in hearing more, and invited us in like some do. All those things got so much stronger. The air felt like it got dense to keep me from moving. My mom looked at me and she said I looked off. Pale and distant. She told him that I seemed to be ill and that we should just leave. As soon as we stepped onto the ground in view of the car, I was completely fine. My mom decided to take me home anyway. We lived 2 blocks away, luckily. Few days later we read in the paper about how that man was arrested for rape and murder of a few women. I think one of them was as young as 16, so a kid. I was 12 at the time. My mom, dutiful witness she was at the time, was convinced the angels stepped in to protect us like we had heard stories of happening to others in the religion. That Jehovah used them to make me feel off to keep us safe. Around 7 years ago I found myself unexpectedly unemployed. I wasn't a truck driver, but I did have a CDL, so was able to get a local job hauling water in a tanker truck from the well to the bottling plant. There were 2 wells in 2 different locations we would go to, one being far more remote and isolated than the other. I rode with one of the guys for a couple days to get training on the procedures. While riding with this guy, he casually mentions that the area the well is in is on land that has a curse and is haunted by some witch. I politely listen and smile and figure he is fucking with the new guy. Well, they typically put the new guys on the longer run in the isolated area, and that's what I ended up doing. I typically went during the day and it was a beautiful forested area with lots of wildlife, pretty enjoyable even though it was isolated. I'd been running loads for a couple months when we got a pretty severe storm, and parts of the roadways to the well were flooded out. I didn't run for a couple days, then dispatch called and asked if I wanted to do a night run. I was ready to get back to work and needed the money, so I said sure. As I made my way to the well, the going was quite slow. In the truck I could get through it, but there were still some spots with some pretty deep water. At a certain point the paved road ended and there was about a 5-mile stretch on dirt road that had a few washouts, some tree limbs laying around, but I finally reached the well. One thing to note is that typically there were a couple trucks at the well, due to a large number of trucks and drivers scheduled to consistently rotate through. But because of the storm, many of the drivers had elected to stay home. So I get there, go in the pump house, do my testing and start filling up the tanker. I do my paperwork as it's filling, everything totally normal. When it's done filling I crawl up on top to lock everything down. It's when I'm on top of the tanker that my truck and tanker lights all go out, and I'm on top of this thing in basically pitch black night. There is a light in the pump house, and when the door is open it gives off a good illumination around the truck. But simultaneously with the lights of my truck mysteriously going out, there is a gust of wind that slams the pump house door shut. As I'm sitting on top of the tanker wondering what the hell just happened, I swear I heard distant, cackling laughter. The hair on the back of my neck literally stood up. I'd always wondered what the hell that meant, but now I knew. I grabbed my cell phone and turned on the flashlight, making it down the side of the tanker in record time. I ran to the cab and tried to get the lights on, but no go. There was no way I could drive it with no lights, and cell phones didn't get service at the well, so I was stuck waiting for the next driver to arrive. I'm not ashamed to say that I locked myself in the pump house for the next hour and a half while I waited. There were at least 2 more times when I could swear I heard laughter, and one time where it sounded like something was scratching against the old wooden door. I have never been so happy to see another person as when I heard that truck pulling up. When I was in nursing school, I did my psychiatric clinical in this hospital that was built in the early 1800s. It was used for a stretch of time as a sulfur bath hospital for mentally ill patients, whatever that means. I think it was called a sanatorium. There were even parts of the hospital that were off-limits/abandoned where you could look into a window and see these old abandoned nuns' quarters, and there were like books and random objects in those rooms to where it looked like shutting down those areas of the hospital was unplanned. It was apparently common knowledge among staff working in that hospital that it was haunted. Staff would tell lots of stories about feeling someone step on the elevator with them, or even seeing a person on the video monitor in one of the locked units who wasn't actually in the room. I took all of this with a grain of salt and thought they were messing with me. One day, one of the staff took me down to the old abandoned morgue in the basement just for funsies because apparently a famous rapper had shot a music video down there because it was so creepy. There were like squares in the wall where the dead bodies used to go. It was all shitty and old looking and looked literally almost like a creepy cave that had been carved out for hospital purposes. After this tour, I had finished my psych clinical duties earlier that day than all my fellow students. We had to use a key that was signed out to us to go down this long dark corridor in this other non-used area of the hospital reserved for students where we would have a post-clinical day meeting with the teacher to discuss our shifts before going home. Since I was done early and the other students weren't back yet, I decided it was a great time to try to poop in the bathroom there, because privacy. So I go in there, in this bathroom at the end of this long dark corridor that I had to use a key to get into, aka nobody else would have just been in there, and start trying to shit. Well, I very clearly hear voices outside the door, but can't make out what they're saying. It sounds like laughing similar to one of the girls in my class. So I'm like, okay. They must have finished clinical early too. Guess I don't get to poop till I get home. Fine. And I walk out of the bathroom and sit in the small classroom right outside of it. And, no one was there. Not my classmates, not my teacher, not staff. Literally nobody. Nobody could have gotten in and out of the locked door at the end of the dark corridor in that period of time either. So I hightailed my ass down to the parking lot and sat in my car for 45 minutes until I knew for sure my classmates would be in that locked area lol. And I never went to the dark locked corridor alone for the rest of that clinical rotation. It turned out to be fine, but still scared the hell out of me at the time. I went to a friend's wedding in Mexico, and after a few drinks with the friends, they all decided to call it a night. But I was feeling determined to get out and practice my Spanish by finding a local bar and hanging out solo. I found a nice place and managed to strike up conversation with the bartender and some regulars, who seemed genuinely impressed with my Spanish conversation skills. In an attempt to seem cool, with limited language skills, I asked about where the best dance clubs are, and where to buy weed. The bartender was super friendly and offered to help me get some weed when his friend picked him up after work. After waiting a while and chatting it up to closing time, his friend arrives. For some reason, I thought it was going to be just a simple transaction, but they tell me to hop in the car, and I stupidly do so. We start driving away, kinda far from my hotel, and I finally sober up/start freaking out and realize that nobody knows where I am and I might be in the process of being kidnapped/robbed. I played it cool. Turns out they were both gay, and they thought I might be gay because I kept asking about dancing. No me importa, I kept trying to tell them, assuring them that I wasn't gay, but that I was cool with LGBTQ in the hopes of winning favor. They took me to a copy store, and smoked a bowl of some horrible weed with me. They also smoked some meth afterwards, which I politely declined. After a little while, they gave me some of their weed, didn't accept any pesos for it, and drove me back to the hotel. Despite feeling lucky to be alive, and like an idiot for putting myself in that situation in the first place, I realized that they were genuinely trying to befriend a foreigner, and I felt kinda bad for probably acting weird. There was a supposed haunted house that a bunch of us in high school would go to occasionally. It was about half-mile down a gravel road on what used to be a farm. There were 2 ways to get there, going down the gravel road of a main road, or a long meandering path to a dead-end road in a neighborhood that backed up to the farm. One time we had a large group of people going out there and we chose to use the longer path so there was more parking for the probably 6 cars worth of people going. My best friend had his foot in a walking boot due to an injury, forget what. Anyway, we did our using screwing around and were leaving. Everyone else left relatively quick, but I chose to hang with my friend who was moving much slower. About halfway back we looked over to our right and about 20 to 30 yards away in the field were 4 guys all with what looked like rifles or shotguns just standing in the field. It was a bright moon and we could see them clearly. We both stopped and crouched down. What the hell? We picked up over the high grass and they were just standing there, point the guns towards us. We just fucking ran. My friend suddenly was able to run so incredibly fast with that boot. It was so freaky. When we caught up to everyone, they said they hadn't seen a thing. Still not sure what the hell was going on. Mine is so tame compared to some of these, but the first house I bought had a finished basement. I never felt anything off and the house was cozy. Our washing machine was down there, as was our entertainment center and couch. My husband worked evenings and one night I started heading toward the basement with a load of laundry in my hands. My dog, Australian Shepherd, very intelligent and aware, saw me head that direction and ran down the steps ahead of me as he always would. The steps were long and narrow and walled in on both sides, so you could only see the floor at the bottom of the steps as you went down until you got to the last 3 or 4 steps. As he was running, he got to the last 3 or 4, looked at something around the corner and stopped dead. His hair stood up. He stared for a moment with me halfway down the steps, standing absolutely still, and after maybe 5 seconds he turned around and booked it back up the steps, around the corner and into my bedroom. I stood there calculating for probably just a few seconds, and finally I decided my best choice was to heave all the laundry down the steps as forcefully as I could and sprint back up the steps, slammed the door to them and ran into my bedroom too. I locked the door and we stayed in there together for the next hour until my husband was home. He wasn't able to carry his phone with him at work, so I just texted a few people to let them know something weird happened. Still to this day have no clue what that dog saw. I never once felt weird in the house after that. Never had any weird experiences there, and just haven't had anything weird or unexplained happen to me in general at any house. It was an older home, so if somebody had climbed up the steps and slipped out before my husband got back, I'm almost positive I'd have heard it. There wasn't a lot of sneaking happening there. Used to work on an ambulance, and the company that I worked for had more ambulances than there were firehouses/medic stations, to keep up with increasing call volumes, so we would do something called posting, which is where you park the ambulance somewhere within the area that you are servicing while you wait for a call. Was working the midnight to 10 a.m. shift one night and it was really slow. On slow nights, we would try to find the darkest areas we could find to post in an attempt to catch some sleep. We find a church within a neighborhood whose parking lot had virtually no light, so we decide to park there. As soon as my partner put the rig in park, I instantly felt incredibly uncomfortable and unsafe. I didn't want to say anything to my partner as I literally had no reason to feel the way I was, but the feeling was almost overwhelming. A few minutes go by and my partner looks at me and says, "Hey man, I don't feel right, something just feels off, do you want to get out of here?" I replied yes, and we got the hell out of there. I have never really figured out why we both had that sensation and why it came on in that church's parking lot, but it sure did give me the creeps. Grew up in Hawaii, spent most of my teen years in the water. I was out surfing one evening with a good buddy. It was just the two of us and the sun was setting. We decided to stay out as long as possible because the waves were really good. There was also a carnival going on the shore, so there was some light. This surf spot is a big reef that is maybe 5 to 6 feet deep, and all around the reef it drops down to hundreds of feet deep. Basically you sit at the edge of the reef and the waves come and suck up water, and it makes it easy to catch them. We're sitting there, it's dark, kinda eerie, and about 20 in front of us we see something for a moment. We both stopped talking and just kept looking for it. Turns out it was a humpback whale frolicking its giant 10 to 15 fin around just off the reef in front of us. I know they're not dangerous, but being out there, with something the size of a school bus swimming around just a few feet from you in the darkness, is hair-raising. We both turned around and caught a wave straight in. I was freaked out for a while after that. I was installing a camera in a customer's home with another guy at work. The wife of the couple we were installing for began the appointment by ranting. For a taste, all the cops are rapists and murderers, all of them, and they didn't do a damn thing to protect the White House. Yet they arrest me and throw me in jail for quoting a scripture while I'm in court. It's just like my damn landlord and the cops are trying to rape me just like the goddamn White House was. It's unbelievable that what she was doing went on like that for 5 minutes before I cut her off. It was her husband, though. The way he looked at both my coworker and I was like a person staring through me, like he knew he was looking at me but didn't see me. In his garage, where we were mounting the camera, this guy with the dead eyes closes the garage door, looks at me for a long 5-second stretch, then says, "Yep, over there is where we let them suffer before we gotta cut the heads off. Gotta let them suffer before cutting the heads off." He locked the outside garage door, turns around and just starts murmuring about cutting off heads again. He must have brought up murder 5 to 8 times in a 10-minute stretch. They call me Sergeant, something, I forget. I reply, "Thank you for your service. I really admire veterans." He looked at me with those dead eyes. I was never in the military. Long stretch of silence. His wife called him on his iWatch. Everything okay down there? Anybody up to something? Long stretch before he replies. Everything's fine. We're just in the garage. Everybody is here and we're fine. I'll call you if I need you. It was like they were talking about something they didn't want us to hear. My coworker and I kept our scissors and razors in our hands from about 5 minutes into that service call for the rest of the way, neither of us letting him be behind us where we couldn't see him. We were bracing for him to try to get us. After we mounted the camera, he asked us to go through the house back to the panel to learn it in. There was no way in hell I was doing that, so I said we need to take the ladder back out to the car. He said we could take it through the house. Remember, he had closed and locked the outside garage door earlier. I said it was a safety hazard and needed to go out the big garage door. Once more he asked us to go through the house, to which I replied we couldn't do that because of company policy with the outdoor ladder. He stared at me for roughly 5 to 10 seconds in silence, then went and opened the garage door. Both of us split out of there and didn't look back. Told the company, locked the account, and wondered if we should have called the cops. I have no idea what would have happened to my coworker had he showed up alone there. He was supposed to be alone. I randomly picked that day to audit him. Both of us swear up and down he felt like he was looking at something less than human and worthy of killing when he looked at us. Creepiest thing I've ever been around. I live in Kyrgyzstan, and here, people who farm animals live in mountainous areas far from big cities, in smaller villages. Every summer they gather animals and herd them few dozen km up to alpine pastures for them to graze and gain weight. In these places, there isn't any infrastructure, just plain green hills, AMD rocky mountains. Even phone barely works. So we bring disassembled yurts by using old Soviet trucks, assemble them at place and live inside in it for entire summer. They are sturdy and easy to use, wooden frame and felt cover wrapped around it. Very cool thing. So anyway, our family is big and one of my grandma's brothers farms animals. He goes to pastures every summer, and for once our family decided to send me and my other relative of same age, we were 12 I think. Wasn't very happy about it, being a city boy who loved playing video games, but as if I had a choice. Surely I got used to all that stuff, hauling water in buckets from nearest river and losing breath from that since oxygen levels there aren't same as in city down below, riding horses to help with herding, watching out for wolves, even got to shoot old AKS-74 at some rock targets once. Well, it was fun in its own way. Anyway, once we were awaiting arrival of some relatives who were supposed to arrive by car. Since asphalt road was about 3 kilometers away from where our yurt was, and there was plenty of free time at that moment, me and 2 other kids, all 12 to 14 years/0, went walking to road to sit there and maybe be first to meet them. About 30 lazy minutes later we got there and sat for hour waiting for car to arrive, in meantime entertaining ourselves in every manner possible. Sunny clear weather, 3 kids having fun with free time on their hands, what else to ask for? Well, that was moment when I learned how bloody quickly weather can change at high altitude. Car was nowhere in sight and we noticed stormy clouds in a distance. None of us cared much, we thought we had plenty of time. Just mere 10 minutes later these clouds in a distance were taking half of horizon and shaking skies with thunderous roar. I guess that's because we were much closer to clouds vertically and couldn't judge their speed properly because of that. So anyway, we are on a plain grassland in between 2 hills, we have 3 kilometers to nearest yurt, there isn't a single damn tree or anything tall than us anywhere. And since we are at high altitude, these storm clouds are way closer to ground than I'd want them to be at that moment. I'd say 100 meters at most. So, we all quickly realize how fucking dangerous it is getting and start moving back to yurt. First at walk pace, but when clouds came over us, we ran. And when violet-colored lightning lightened up everything around with rail pouring as if from bucket, we ran. Never have I ran with such a wild fear in me. Mind fully clean of any thought, just pure adrenaline and insanely beating heart. I think we covered those 3 kilometers in record time, and that was one hell of an experience. Luckily nobody got hit by lightning, and we all were laughing and having fun just 5 minutes after getting back into safety. So yeah, be careful with weather, never know how quickly it can change. When I was 16-17, I was texting with a friend's older brother, 19-20, who was a local paramedic. He was sweet on me. Love bombing sweet. At that age, I didn't know better and just loved the idea that an older guy was so sweet on me. I'd only met him in person once at a ball game. One day, he randomly showed up to the little countryside cafe I worked at. He insisted I take his Letterman even though it was in the heat of summer. It was weird, but he was insistent, so I took it. We kept texting and things got weird and possessive. I got scared and basically ghosted him. I never told him where I lived. But not even a few days later, I was home alone, way out in the middle of nowhere, with my younger stepsister, and I hear banging on the door. It was him. He was yelling for me to come out right away. Beating the door. It was an old, run-down single-wide trailer, so nothing was really home invader-proofed. He started kicking the door hard. The whole trailer was shaking. Throwing stuff at the windows and screaming. I got my mom's shotgun, hid my stepsister in the closet, and called the police. It felt like forever. He didn't stop until I heard tires on the gravel pull up. A cop came inside and said he claimed I stole his Letterman and class ring and was just there to get his stuff back. The ring was in the jacket pocket, but I didn't know. I gave it to the cop, and I don't know what happened to him, but needless to say there was not future contact. I still don't know how he learned where I lived. Around a year ago, I went jogging around my, pretty safe, neighborhood and decided to continue my jog up to a corner store nearby so I could just buy some stuff. As soon as I'm in the parking lot, a guy in a car pulls into the parking lot as well and smiles at me. I felt pretty creeped out at that moment, but didn't think too much of it and just entered the store. I was looking for some alcohol wipes in the medical aisle, and the guy walks into the store and starts to look for whatever in the same aisle as me. Me being pretty dense, took several minutes to find what I was looking for, and the guy was just staring at the items, not getting it all. At this point, I'm pretty creeped out, but I didn't want to say anything. I'm still looking for what I need, and I guess after seeing that I hadn't grabbed anything to buy, the guy leaves the store without buying anything. I'm super relieved that he left, but still unnerved by the experience. I finally find what I need, but decide to linger around the store just so I can wait until he leaves the parking lot. Then, after around 10 minutes or so, he comes back into the store and stays around before buying something and heading out once more. Feeling absolutely unsafe to go out the parking lot alone and jogging back home, I call my friend to just drive over and pick me up. They arrive after a few minutes and I head out to their car, only to see the guy waiting outside his car, as if he were waiting for me to head out. Once he spots me getting into my friend's car, he hops back in his car and drives out the parking lot. No idea what could have happened had I not called my friend, despite it being a sunny afternoon and in a relatively populated area. I honestly have a handful of stories, but the most recent has to be a 55-year-old man coming to my house at 11:30 p.m. and trying to break in with the knowledge I was alone inside. To give some backstory, I am a 23-year-old girl. I recently moved back to my home state to pursue a medical tech program. I had been living on my own in FL and then Mount for the previous 2 years and had not really visited home much or been very involved with my family outside of my grandparents, as they were my main caregivers when I was a child. My parents, divorced, are both unstable, mom out of the picture, but my dad is at least trying. When I moved back, my dad told me I could live in his house, my childhood home, by myself, as he lived with his GF in a different town about half an hour away. However, his friend would be over a lot, never inside the house, but he owed him for something or other and his friend was repaying him by doing some free landscaping. I didn't mind. And his friend didn't really do more than wave to me occasionally when I was coming and going from the house. It was fine for about a month, then one evening he knocked on my door. I had an intensely bad feeling, but I opened it. I had no reason not to, and he said he just wanted to talk to me a bit as he had become close with my dad in the last year and wanted to get to know me too. Weird, but okay. I didn't want to be rude, but I did tell him I had plans I had to get ready for shortly. A lie. I sat on the porch and talked to him while he drank. Things quickly became strange. I am divorced, also a long story, and I guess he knew this information from my dad. He first said he was surprised to learn this, because I look so young, barely 18. He told me if he had a chance to marry such a beautiful woman, he wouldn't waste it and do everything he could to provide for me and make me happy. At this point I was just silent, because I was scared and uncomfortable. He then goes on to tell me I need to focus on the pleasures of life. Then he started offering me cocaine and then cut it up on my patio table and did lines on my front porch. I kept saying no and that he needed to put it away and not bring that back to my house. He said okay and that he just wanted to respect me. I said I had to start getting ready for my plans and he finally left. I called my friends and actually did go to one of their houses because I was scared. I told my dad about this, and said that his friend needs to not speak to me anymore. I didn't even want him there, but the house desperately needed the work outside, so I took one for the team. I honestly didn't think it would escalate. It did though. This guy would keep coming into the backyard, around my bedroom windows, not an area they were working on, and with the layout of the home it is out of the way to get to from the side yard where the work was being done. Again I told my dad this and he talked to his friend. Instead of just stopping the behavior, his friend showed up drunk to apologize to me. He kept saying all he wanted to do was respect me. I said okay, then don't talk to me, don't come onto the porch, don't come around the house, The area they were working on was on the other side of our separate garage, no reason for him to be anywhere close to the actual house. I told him he needed to just leave me alone, and that I was only being nice because he was my dad's friend. I've had to fend for myself damn near my whole life, and I'm usually not nice the first time I have to address something like this. My dad talked to him again, and basically said that the dude really needed to leave me alone. Do the work that was owed and leave, which the work wasn't really getting done either, and they were mostly drinking and getting high on coke. Anyway, things were fine for maybe another week. I was sitting on my couch studying for a med terminology exam. I hear a knock on my door and my heart sank. Luckily, I had a weird feeling earlier and closed the curtains to my front windows. I had to walk by them to get to a safe part of the house with locking doors. I slowly crept to the far side of the house and I peeked out the windows to look in the direction of the porch. He was standing out there, swaying drunk, and now banging on the door. He had a dead look in his eyes, and aside from smashing his fist repeatedly into my solid oak front door, he was silent. I saw some kind of string wrapped around the fist he was hitting the door with. I froze for a second and the sound almost became muffled. I got up and went to my bedroom, closed the blinds and crouched behind my bed fumbling with my phone to call my dad. I know, I should have called 911, but his friend isn't legally in the country and has a child here, so I didn't want that on my conscience. It was late, so my dad didn't pick up immediately. 10 minutes had already passed, and the banging stopped, so I just took a second to breathe and try to collect myself. When I thought I was finally in the clear, the banging resumed again. Except this time it was on the back of the house, right where my bed is located in my room. This means he definitely had been looking through my windows and knew the layout of my bedroom. I felt like this couldn't actually be happening to me. Then he started to fumble with the window next to my bed. It's an old house and it's not too hard to get in through one if you wanted to. I started to panic and felt like I was going to throw up my own heart. I definitely don't live in a suburb, but I knew that my neighbors could hear if I screamed. So I did. I screamed as loud as I could. I climbed over my bed and held onto my windowsill and screamed while flailing my body around like a crazy person. It was genuinely primal. I wasn't thinking to do that necessarily, but it frightened him off lol. I finally got a hold of my dad and he came and spent the night at the house and stayed for about a week so I would feel safe. He told the guy to never come back to the house or else, and the guy kept saying he was only trying to ask to use the bathroom? Lol. Glad something crazy inside me took over, or else I don't know what would have gone down. It happened about 6 months ago, and every odd noise I hear, I immediately fear that he's come back. If he does, I will call 911, but I really hope he doesn't. I once had a roller coaster at Cedar Point all but blow up directly over mine and my GF's heads while walking under it. The lift chain snapped somewhere near the top of the hill, stranding the cart about 90% up the hill. We heard what sounded a bit like the chain cranking up the hill, but much louder and with less of a ratcheting sound. Eventually I looked up and noticed in the little window at the center of the track that the chain was moving the wrong way. I looked over to see the chain piling up at the bottom of the hill just 12 feet over our heads with nothing between it and us to protect us. I grabbed my GF's arm and yelled run. And we both took off. Our friends behind us had already taken cover, they had a better view of the pile of chain building up, and were frantically gesturing for us to get under the track with them. When the chain reached its end, it flung up really high and sent grease and grime everywhere before flopping over the edge right where we were standing, albeit not nearly far enough over the track to reach our height. Several years ago, I woke up and was wide awake at like 4 a.m. This wasn't unusual. I have always had issues getting back to sleep when I wake up, unless I'm exhausted. So after a few minutes of being out of bed, I decide to head to 7-Eleven and get coffee. It's only about 4 blocks from my house and I decide to walk. Even though I'm walking down a major road, there's no traffic. Small town, middle of the night, a van cruises by on the opposite side of the road, and I notice that they hit their brakes the moment they pass me. A second later, they pull a U-turn and then turn down a side road a half block ahead of me, and they're waiting. They're just a few car lengths down the road and sitting there, just outside of the shine of the street lights from the road I'm on. I'm immediately paranoid, because there's a Taco Bell, closed, with a big and convenient parking lot that they've avoided going into, despite the fact that if you needed to check your GPS or your phone or whatever, that would be a much more convenient spot to stop. What they're doing raises a red flag. So I pick up my pace and edge slightly toward the road. I'm walking on the berm in between the sidewalk and the road itself, and moving briskly. No need to show panic, but if I need to put distance between them and me, this is in my best interest. Sure as shit, when I get closer to the road they're sitting on, I notice that there's a guy in the driver's seat, but his passenger is by the back of the van. Hey, can you help me? What's up? I keep walking. Could you come here a minute? Why? What do you need? Just, can you come over here? No. I can't do that. Now I'm at least 250 feet past them. He and I are both having to yell, and I'm a half block from 7 to 11. What the fuck is wrong with people? The guy says. Don't you trust me? Nope. Fuck you then. So I go into 7 to 11, I see the van drive by a couple of minutes later. I mention to the clerk what just happened when he comments that I seem to be a little on edge. I wonder if it was these guys, he says. He shows me the newspaper and points to a small article about a rash of robberies. A pair of guys in a van were apparently luring people to get close, then holding them at gunpoint and robbing them. I am 100% certain that those guys were the ones that I met. I grew up on farmland in rural Pennsylvania. It was the type of area where all of your neighbors knew your business. We had these weird neighbors down the street, about a quarter of a mile away and a few houses down, that never associated with anyone else in the neighborhood. Their family consisted of the 2 parents, 2 adult sons, and 2 adult daughters. They all lived in the house together, never socialized, and I had never in my life seen the daughters the entire time that they lived there. The kids were homeschooled. I know this because my family farm has been on this rural land since the late 1800s, so my dad, aunts, and uncles were in school at the same time as the adult children in the family. My dad and uncle also told my friends and I some tall tales about this family, things like they would tie the daughters to trees outside overnight, that the father of the family got money from the US government because he was a twin and experimented on during World War II, far-fetched, I know. In my lifetime, I witnessed the family pull guns on people who would come to their house to trick or treat on Halloween, or on anyone from the gas/water companies trying to read their meters. So, when I was in my late teens, about 15 to 17 years old, there was an incident where one of the daughters had purposefully crashed the car that she was driving into a tree in an attempt at suicide. She survived. A few months later, my family was coming home from dinner in the evening and there was a swath of police cars outside of their house. The same daughter who attempted suicide earlier had shot herself in the head inside of the home. Obviously very tragic. The rest of the family moved to Florida within that month. The house sat vacant for months and months. My friends and I were obsessed with scary things, abandoned places, etc. I often walked our back roads, and noticed one day while walking past the vacant house that the door to the basement appeared to be slightly ajar. I was too chicken shit to test it myself, but the next time my 2 best friends were over, we decided to go explore. We walked to the house, and walked right in the basement door. It was a 2-story house, white with black trim, quite beautiful. The basement was full of junk. I remember a small booth like you would see in a restaurant and a plastic kiddie pool full of cat litter. We walked up the basement stairs and the door to the rest of the house was unlocked, so we continued our exploration. The main level was eerie because they had left all of their stuff, and it was covered with white sheets, TVs, couches, you name it. We went up to the 2nd floor where the bedrooms were. In one of the bedrooms, I assume the daughter's room, there was drippy red writing on the wall that said "Tanya come home." Tanya was the name of the daughter that took her own life. It was clearly paint that someone had intended to look like blood. I took a picture on my mom's old school digital camera, the ones that you put floppy disks into, and we noped the fuck out. Time passes. Someone buys the house. The family never came back for their stuff. The people who bought the house burned it down, and never rebuilt anything there. It is still an empty lot. More time passes, and when I'm in my early 20s, I hear the news from my cousin that they had cadaver dogs in the field behind where the house used to be. They're investigating a decades-old cold case involving a 7-year-old girl being abducted and disappeared from Florida. Why were they searching in rural Pennsylvania, you ask? Turns out this family were friendly to one man, who they let live in a camper in their backyard. This one man was the suspect in the abduction case, but he had died before becoming a suspect. The cadaver dogs didn't find anything, and the case is still cold. The family never came back to PA. Not really mine, but my dad's. My dad is insanely paranoid at times. Particularly in new locations/areas. Always worried someone is going to come out and mug him, or kidnap me and do no things to me. Understandable fear for any father, but my dad was extreme to the point where growing up I was constantly paranoid about being followed, kidnapped, assaulted. Whatever. Anyway, my dad brought me to my friend's house to meet up and plan where to go. My dad ended up freaking out and having a panic attack. He made me get back into the truck and sped off without my friends. I had to call them and figure out where to go. Luckily they caught up. But my dad seriously thought we were going to get mugged, jumped, shot or anything else terrible. I didn't like the fact he didn't know how to get to the police station or hospital. Again, understandable to have this knowledge, but he was really freaking out. I couldn't speak. He drove the truck up to the governor's limit, and refused to say anything or correspond with me until we got back to where we were staying. I've never seen him so horrified and filled with panic and fear. I was in Belize on vacation with my extended family. I was maybe 20 years old, maybe 21. We went together, a large group of us, to a local outdoor bar that was maybe 10 minutes from our little hotel. We were there for a while, all drinking rum punches, local music was playing, good times overall being had. Kinda getting close to the end of the night and I decide on getting one more drink. I go to the bartender and ask for a rum punch for me and a beer for my dad. He makes my drink, then goes out of sight with it, behind the bar. My gut's twisted. He takes forever. When he comes back, I told him that I changed my mind and would prefer a beer, so you can have that one for yourself or give it to someone else. He looks wild-eyed at me. Going to the bathroom at this local bar required you going to the back of this establishment and through a dark, sketchy who knows what. I just have this utmost belief I was at risk of being hurt or taken. The bartender's reaction when I denied my drink was enough for me to know I read that situation correctly. I went to a Catholic high school that was way across town, and for the first couple of years, I mostly relied on public transportation to get me to and from school. I often hung around after school for a bit before catching the first of the 3 or 4 buses and trains that constituted my route home. It took a couple of hours on a good day when I made all my transfers. One day, I had hung around for an hour or so after school. I found myself alone at the bus stop nearest my school, waiting for a late bus to start my trip home, when along came one of the priests from my school in his big white caddy. He offered me a ride home. He was new to the school, but not a total stranger to me. I accepted, knowing I would shave at least an hour and a half off my trip and be home in half an hour or so. Once inside, he struck up a pretty normal conversation considering the situation. When I answered his question about where I wanted to go to college, he told me he could help me get in there, Jesuit school, he had connections. He told me he had helped lots of other boys get in there, and then put his hand on my leg, invited me to the rectory sometime so I could meet some of the other boys he had helped. By this point, I knew exactly what was going on. Luckily, we were nearly home, and his hand hadn't strayed too far up my thigh, so I played it cool. I had him drop me off at the entrance to the condo complex where I lived with my mom. As soon as he was out of sight, I bolted home and told my mom what had happened. She had connections, too. She had been a nun for 15 years prior to marrying my dad and had been a teacher in local Catholic elementary schools for years. She knew the principal of my school. In fact, he was sweet on her, always trying to get her to date him, lol. She called him up, and I never saw the priest again. This happened today. On a crowded subway with a lot of bags, was traveling. Sat down next to a guy who seemed maybe a little off but no major red flags. He took his hands out of his pockets and they were necrotic and there was visible blood / other stuff / more swelling than I've ever seen. I felt terrible for him but also sort of worried for myself because that has got to be a biohazard. He was missing several fingers and the remaining ones looked like they were soon to go. Once I could get up, I did, and moved to the end of the subway car, where I stood. Looked over at the map of stops and caught eye contact with another man, who proceeded to stare at me. I'm a younger woman and was alone, and refused to look away. I got the fuck out of that train car at the next available stop. I was visiting a friend's house in the hills of West Texas. At the time I was in college and working on an online course, so I stayed up late that night to get some work done. We have this tradition of getting this specific cigar every time we hang out. Well, we had smoked part of them earlier, but I thought I would go hang out on the back porch and finish my cigar. It was around 2:30 a.m. and I was watching videos on my phone while laying back in one of those poolside chairs. I was in a somewhat remote area, so everywhere the dim light on the porch didn't reach was pitch black. All of a sudden I heard the sound of steps in the grass behind me. I stood up quickly and turned around and heard a blood-curdling sound I had never heard in my life. Kind of high-pitched but a sort of growl and then complete silence. I can't see more than 5 feet in front of me, so I turned facing toward the sound and started slowly backing up toward the sliding door on the porch. I pulled the door open, went inside and watched for what seemed like 30 minutes, wondering if I would see it come up to the porch. I woke my friend up and tried explaining it to him. I think at first he didn't really believe me, but then saw that I was visibly shaking with adrenaline. About a week later, I was back home and he tells me that his neighbor let his dog out in the morning, but when he went back to get it, it was gone. He walked down into the valley area looking for his dog and about a mile from his backyard, he found his dog completely ripped apart. I'm fairly sure what snuck up on me that night was a mountain lion. Not nearly as chilling as many of these responses, but here I go anyways. Probably 19, went out for drinks downtown with a best friend, my boyfriend and her date with his band who were performing at one of the bars. We had fun, was a good time, and we started walking back to the date's house that he shared with other members of the band. We had all drank a lot, so when we got there the majority of us were hanging out in the living room as it was basically the entrance of the house. My friend and her date went to his room. We had no plans to stay there overnight and her mom wanted us back when the show was over. My BF was incredibly drunk and almost passed out on the couch, so we put on some TV and all just hung out. After what seemed like an hour I decided we all better be going and I got up to go get my friend. One of the band members stood up. This guy was at least 250 pounds and towered over me as I was only 5 feet 5 inches, and said to leave my friend, that she was having fun and I wasn't going to ruin his friend's fun. That we were okay to leave but she was going to stay. This creeped me out, like he was going to make me abandon my friend in a house of guys, all drunk as hell. I raised my voice and told him I wasn't leaving without her, and he continued to push on that I wasn't going to ruin his friend's fun. He blocked the hallway and I once again raised my voice, repeating myself. He began to repeat himself and I pushed with all my force past him, into the hallway, and began to scream my friend's name. I drunkenly pushed down the hallway and found her in the guy's room, passed out. I woke her and brought her out with me while the large band guy was still going on about how it was all cool and how I was ruining the fun. Clearly my friend was fine. Got out of the house and finally got a cab home. It felt like such a sketchy situation and I don't know what would have happened if we just left her there. Never leave your friends, go as a group and leave as a group. So where I live there is a 4-way intersection, and on the right side corner when you're turning right from the north, you are either making a blind turn or crossing blind. I own a car and a moped, and I was taking the moped for a joyride one day on December 6th, the anniversary of my best friend's death, to go visit his grave. I'm going at the 45 miles per hour speed limit approaching this green light. All of the sudden, I feel my hair on my back stand up, and a voice scream, "Stop motherfucker, stop." So I slam on the brakes, which caused people behind me to slam on theirs and honk at me. A split second later, a crashing sound to my right penetrates the air, and I see a dude fly out of the car that hit the other 2 cars that were stopped at a red light. I also see the 2 cars get flung forward and get absolutely fucked up. I pull over on the curb and call 911 while people run to the scene. What happened was they were hit by a drunk driver who was piss drunk. All 3 people were killed. I'll never forget seeing 3 body bags get dragged out. All because someone could not grab their keys and go driving in the middle of the day when piss drunk. Fuck people who drink and drive. I have no doubt that Javier was watching out for me that day. I was washing my car one night and there was a man in a blue pickup a few bays down from me. We made eye contact and I quickly got a bad gut feeling to keep an eye on him and that something wasn't right. I got in my car, moved it further away from him and went on to wash my car and leave the car wash. Leaving the car wash, I committed his truck to memory and kept an eye on it to make sure I knew where it was. My dog had to go to the bathroom before staying in for the night, so I decided to park in the adjacent lot that had a big grass area for her to run around a bit before going home. I kept my eyes on the car wash because I was still feeling uneasy. I parked, got out with my dog and kept my focus on the lot beside me. Moments after getting out of the car and letting my dog off leash, I see the truck pull out and turn into the empty lot where I was parked. My car was the only one parked there at this time of night. As soon as I saw he was pulling in, I opened my passenger door and screamed for my dog to get in the car now. She's usually not a great listener, especially off-leash exploring, but she must have sensed my urgency and fear because she listened immediately and ran and jumped in the car. I ran around to the driver's side, got in and locked my doors. Just as I had gotten in the car, the blue truck parked beside me as close as possible that I would not have been able to open my driver's side door. For some reason I looked at the man in the truck through my window and he looked amused and content that I was obviously fearing him. It was winter and my windows were foggy so I couldn't see well, but I reversed and booked it out of there. I drove around town instead of going home to make sure he wasn't following me. I still wonder to this day exactly what his intention was and what ideas he had, because he was obviously doing something. I'm glad I never found out what he was planning, but still to this day I wonder what could have happened if I wasn't being vigilant. I'm pretty late to the party, but the biggest one I can remember is during a yearly camping trip with my friends. We had all been drinking pretty heavily for most of the day and I had taken a nap in my hammock. I woke up around 5 p.m. or so and it seemed way too dark. I climbed out in my half-drunk / half-hungover / fully dehydrated state and realized how dark the sky was, and watched as some scary-looking clouds rolled in. We all battened down the hatches and either prepped our tent / hammocks for the rain or took them down entirely. About 20 minutes later all hell breaks loose, insane winds, lightning and deafening thunder, and rain so thick you could hardly see 10 feet in front of you. We had huddled under the canopies we brought with until they had gotten picked up and tossed to the side like paper by the wind. We decided we needed to find shelter, and there was a casino a few miles down the road from our campsite. We jumped in our cars without really considering none of us were sober enough to drive, and made it about halfway before a tree blew down in the road right in front of us. As we were moving it, a county sheriff drives by and asks us if we're alright. We tell him yeah, explain we're camping and going to take shelter at the casino. He tells us that's a great idea as there were 4 separate tornadoes on the ground in the county. Next day we go into town to find food and the devastation was incredible. Massive trees snapped like twigs, wrapped up in the power lines. The whole town had no power or internet. Gas stations were out of gas from everyone filling up their generators, if they electricity to pump it all. Turned out to be weeks before they got power and internet back, as we found out the following year. As a kid, I was probably 15 at the time and weighed maybe 85 pounds. I worked at a bar in back of house doing prep, dishes etc. I had a very poor relationship with my stepmom at this point and we would often fight. Well, this particular day we fought it out with it ending that she was not bringing me to work and I'd have to find a way there. So be it. I eventually got to work, worked my shift and got out. At this point it was 11:30 to 12:00, so stood there and waited. And waited. And she never showed up. This was kinda expected, it just sucked cause I did not have a phone at the time. So I started walking home on Wednesday night at 12:30. Home was about a 4 to 5 mile walk home, so I was in for the long haul. I eventually got out to a road that is like a weird cul-de-sac to my right, kinda like a turnaround. And this tinted window busted ass station wagon drives past me, pulls into the cul-de-sac and just waits there. At this point I stopped walking and was just eyeing this car that was sitting in the turnaround 20 feet ahead of me. Vibes were off. Vibes were hella off. So I did what I think any rational kid would do and crossed the street and started walking the other way. And as I did this they pulled out and started driving toward me. My brain started screaming. So I ran like fucking hell. I booked it, got off the street as soon as I could and ran to some stranger's house into their driveway and hid behind their car hoping they'd think I'd gone inside or something. They drove past twice in the time I sat there. Eventually enough time had pasted and I hadn't seen them that I focused on making home. When the time was right, I booked it the fuck home. Like ran all the way. Got home, stepmom was up, told her what happened and that I was pissed. She didn't want to hear it and just went to bed lamau. Still had to go to school the next day. I was sitting out in a convertible, with the top down and music up, at around 1 a.m. on a single lane dirt road in the middle of a cornfield waiting at a railroad crossing, unmarked, because I heard a train horn really close and couldn't see around the bend. I waited about 20 seconds and then turned the music off and realized I couldn't hear the rumbling of a train coming. It was almost silent out, except I did hear the sound of the corn moving a bit and glanced back just in time to see the gleam of a headlamp belonging to a truck that had crept up behind me with the lights off, and there were now fucking people sneaking up on me against the corn along the side of the road. All of them cast red from my taillights. And right at that moment the truck honked. It was the train horn I'd heard. I fully believe they wanted me to stop at the tracks so they could do God knows what. I'm just super thankful that reflection caught my eye. I'm from a small town in Kansas and when I was in 6th grade, I went to clean a house with my mom that was going up for sale. An older lady lived there nearly her entire life and passed away, so it was going up for sale. Very cool kind of Victorian 2-story with crystal doorknobs and skeleton key locks on every door. While my mom was dusting and cleaning the walls, I decided to go explore. I went upstairs and walked around to each room. There was one room with the door shut. I opened it and it was a small bedroom with newspaper over the windows. Completely empty except an upside down aluminum bucket in the middle of the room. I saw a closet door, so I went over and opened it up. There were children's pencil drawings all over the wall. Very normal stuff like trees, animals and stick people. When I turned to the right I noticed that the back of the door had wide, full claw marks like fingernails. I ran downstairs and told my mom. She went to look for herself. She was visibly disturbed but kept cleaning the house. I ran down the street back to my house. The house burned down in the middle of the night when I was in high school. Still empty. I still think about that ducking closet. My husband and I were trying to get an Uber from the airport to our hotel about 15 minutes away. The app said no drivers were available. A car pulls up with an Uber sign on the dash and asks if we need a ride. He shows us his Uber profile on his phone even though he didn't show up on our app. He says Uber takes too much of a percentage, so he prefers payment through Venmo. It's late and my husband just wants to get to the hotel, so we agree to take the ride and give the driver the hotel address. I plug it into my map as well to follow along. About 10 minutes and the driver misses the highway exit we were supposed to take. I pointed out to my husband, terrified, as I already had a bad feeling. The driver takes a call and mentions our hotel but otherwise is speaking in another language. My husband points out that we've missed our exit and the driver brushes it off, saying he is avoiding a toll. He continues to miss exits, adding another 10 minutes to the ride, and my husband adamantly insists he take the exit. The guy suddenly veers off and takes the exit last minute and drives erratically to our hotel. Man, we jumped out of that car. My heart was pounding so hard and I was convinced we were getting kidnapped. One night some friends and I took LSD, and we were going to go to this haunted house. Not an amusement jump scare thing, like an abandoned house back in the woods that some murders happened at. Well, we get down this rough dirt driveway and come up on basically a mansion that was pretty sketchy looking with holes in the roof, windows busted out. Nah. Hell no. What? Go hard or go home? I'm going home. Something's not right here. Well, I talked everyone out of it and we get down the road a bit. Cop pulls over and asks us what we were up to. Oh, just coming back from McDonald's. Cop stare, nope. Try again. So I had to look him directly in the eye while hallucinating and tell him we heard about a haunted house and wanted to see it but chickened out and didn't go in. That's better. I was watching you the whole time, and if you had gone in, you all would be going to jail. Somebody fell through the floor in there last week and we are keeping an eye on it. So tell everybody else to stay out of there too. My buddy had a vial of LSD, somebody had some coke, and we all had weed on us. I saved us all from jail and possible injury for saying hell no. I spent most of my life hitchhiking around the world, and while I have incredible stories from it, I have few fucking terrifying ones. This is the lighter of two crazy ones that come to mind. Hitching in the Netherlands is pretty incredible. They have state-funded hitching spots, and while rides are quite short, usually 10-20 km, you get them insanely fast. Like, imagine as soon as you get out of one, another car pulls up and takes you. That is exactly the type of day I was having. Fast rides and just feeling the rush of being back on the road after a bit of a bender in Amsterdam. I got just outside the city of Deventer where some dude picked me up right as I was walking to the hitching spot. I ended up streaming someone, and I have always wondered what he would have done in that car. The first sign that I was absolutely fucked was when I looked in the back seat. All of the seats were missing. There wasn't even anything in the back. It was one of those small red two-doored cars that you see all over Europe, just missing the seats. Then I noticed all of the electronics were torn out of the car. No radio. No buttons. Barely any console. Inevitably the conservation started. He immediately proclaimed to be the protector of Deventer. At this point am I just letting him ramble? Apparently he made music that protected the city from the Facebook and the internet. His music was the key to fighting them off, and that he played his music everywhere. We left the highway and went down some dirt road. The whole day I had been hitching east towards Germany. I was trying to make it back to Berlin. This is when panic took over. I started pleasing for him to take me back to the highway, telling him about how much I needed to be back tonight. He kept driving and driving. Eventually he told me that I had to sleep at his house that night. He insisted I spend the night and kept driving in the middle of nowhere. When he refused to stop, I went into flight mode. I popped the door open and rolled out of the car with my packs. Without even thinking, I ran into a file, then slid down an irrigation ditch. I kept running, right leg bruised to shit. Pack soaked. Adrenaline racing. Eventually I found train tracks and managed to get on a train that would take me to the border of Germany. I slept in Hanover that night at the train station. Hubs and I were house shopping and we ended up at this vacant log house. There were other homes nearby, but the layout of the land made it very private. The second we walked into the house, my husband, myself and our realtor all got creeped out. Can't explain it, but just felt uncomfortable and like there was something waiting for us. We barely looked at the place, we were so creeped out. Our realtor was heavily pregnant at the time and we had already been to a couple of places, so she went to use the bathroom before we left, and my husband and I stepped outside. When she tried to leave the house a minute later, the front door had somehow locked and wouldn't open for her. It had one of those keypad locks, not sure if that makes a difference. She managed to get out through another door, but it just cemented the fact that something wasn't right with this house, and we got out of there as fast as possible. Just the memory of the creepy feeling this house gave makes me shudder. I was home for Christmas break from boarding school. We lived in a very rural area, and there was a blizzard/ice storm. My dad had to be a badass and drive us all into town. The road was paved with ice. We got about 6 miles from town and saw this thing running down the power lines along the road. It was human size with a long dog face, visible teeth, music note-shaped ears that stuck up, a cape/robe, and a spitz-like dog tail. It was all black except the eyes were triangular and yellow. It was running down the power lines on all fours like a squirrel. I saw it out of the picture window of the van. We all saw it. It stopped and looked at us and kept going. Dad turned around and we went home and he locked the house door, which we never did. We did not talk about it then and never talked about it after. I am a little shit and made a papier-mâché head of that thing and dressed up as it for Halloween at boarding school. I have no idea what it was. I was biking back to my dorm one night from one of my electives in college and I had to cross a baseball field, and the baseball field was right next to the train tracks with a bike path in between the baseball field and train tracks. There were street light illuminating the bike paths spaced out from each other. While I was biking across the field, I was looking ahead in the dark at the bike path and saw a shadowy figure cross underneath one of the street lights illuminating the bike path. I saw him enter the light then leave, and as I got closer and closer I saw in the dark how there was no one on the bike path at all. It was completely empty. I was so scared because I had to cross the path of the shadow figure I had just saw. I was so scared something was going to happen to me. I just wanted to get back to my dorm and lock the door. This happened in Chico, California, and people dying at the train tracks is frighteningly a mix between rare and common. Me and a friend were exploring an abandoned construction site when a drunk dude with a spiked bat appears out of nowhere and starts to run towards us. He was screaming in a language we didn't understand. I think it was Polish? It was particularly terrifying because we were climbing a crane and we were up high, so we were trying our best to get back down there without falling to our death, but at the same time we were trying to hurry before the guy could reach the crane. My friend got stuck in the fence we broke to get inside, and he actually got hit by the bat dude on the foot and screamed so loudly, I genuinely thought he was going to die. Yes, I didn't stop to rescue him when he got stuck, I kept running like a pussy. I only got back when I saw he freed himself. We managed to escape to our bikes and got him straight to the emergency room. We thought about calling the police, but then we didn't because we were in the wrong for breaking in private property and we were scared. 10 years later I still regret leaving him on that fence. I used to rent a house from my aunt. It's on land that was inhabited by Native Americans. There is a museum up the road and you can find arrowheads everywhere by just digging around in the yard. Well, you can imagine it gets a bit creepy at night around those parts. 3-acre plot with a nice driveway and such. When the fog rolled in, you'd get that feeling I'm telling you. Halfway up the driveway there was a street light that sometimes flickered off and on, super creepy like. Well, I was all by myself. The wife and kid went to her sister's for the weekend. You faithful narrator here decided it was a good time to indulge in a bit of bourbon and a few reefer sticks in the yard by a campfire I had made, real peaceful and such. Well, to my surprise that old creepy light was at it again, flickering off and on. I said to it, I said, stop fucking with me light, I'm trying to listen to this music and make love to this bottle, yo. Shit you in no way. It flickers off then on and there is a man standing there, a real shadow type figure. My dog got up quick as fuck and starts barking, light flicks off and back on, no goddamn shadow man. My guns are in the house, so I bolt my ass inside and my boy Winston, the goodest boy, runs with me and he has fucking hair in his back losing his shit inside. I get the shotgun and a flashlight and go outside. The dog sticks right by me and we walk the driveway. We get to the light and it flickers again. Man, I swear me and the doggo took our asses at a speed I've never ran in my life. We got inside and I locked the doors. We went upstairs and laid down in the bed. Woke up later and I felt like someone was standing over me. Winston was asleep and I was fucking terrified. I was sleeping with that 12 gauge like it was the love of my life and I've never felt so helpless. I spoke directly to whatever was there out loud. I told whatever it was I was there in peace and all I wanted to do was work the land for my family, and I swear to respect it the best I could. Just like my family before me, after I said my piece I felt at ease and never felt any sort of darkness there again. Holy fuck was I shook to my soul though. I've only told my wife this story since, so there it is, the most terrifying experience I've experienced. And I've been held at gunpoint twice in my life. Neither of those moments even come close to how helpless I felt in that moment. All I felt like I could do was be as honest as I could to whatever the fuck it was I was feeling or possibly saw. It was some good ass weed, but I don't think it was the herb, folks. Shit was bananas. The time it took me to type this, my eyes welled up with fear tears and I got the shivers twice. Fuck y'all, straight terror. R.I.P. Winston, the goodest boy, didn't leave my side that day like a fucking G. Grandfather committed suicide via firearm in the backyard after suffering from cancer. Some days later we had his funeral and returned back to the house where we had a celebration of life. Later in the evening we decided to all go out to dinner. Our entire family left the house and locked up. We come home around later in the evening, maybe 9 p.m, and as we walk through the dark house, we all hear what sounds like a screeching or eagle sound that I've never heard of in my entire life. Sounded like someone burning alive. So because of the noise, my grandma freaks out and thinks her cat is hurt and begins screaming and yelling while frantically running to her bedroom. My uncle and his family are following her, me and my mom are staying in the back freaking out. We find the cat under the bed sitting there scared and fine. To this day we have no idea what it was. My grandma seems to blame my older brother and claims he did something to her computer, but I doubt it since he was with us the entire time, including when we left to eat. This is actually sort of funny. 20 years ago I was a young goth guy and I was dating a goth girl, and of course, we would go for walks in the cemetery because if you don't do that at least 4 times a year they revoke your goth license. This girl had quite an imagination, and to this day I'm not entirely sure how many ghost stories of hers were based on things that actually happened or if they were all made up for fun, but she had quite a few. For one, her house was haunted. A black figure would peek around corners and vanish. Late at night, you could hear someone running up and down the stairs. There was a hole in the ceiling above one of the bedrooms, covered over with plastic, and hands could be seen pressing on it from the attic where, incidentally, objects would be moved mysteriously and all manner of noises could be heard at any given time. She refused to sleep in her own bedroom because of a dark shape that would hover above her bed at night, call her by name and even inflict bodily harm. She told stories about walking in the front door and feeling a slap across her face, or getting up in the middle of the night to get a glass of water that inexplicably split right down the middle while in her hand. There was more where she really stretched my suspension of disbelief, like when a ghost personalized a book or taped over a VHS tape. But I did go up in that attic one time, and it was incredibly creepy. I could swear I heard voices in the air. I only stayed overnight in that house once, and while I didn't experience anything supernatural, there was a cold spot that she told me was a little girl who liked to play in that room. You could hear her singing sometimes, she said. So it should be no surprise that we encountered ghosts and spirits pretty regularly, or rather she regularly would tell me that she saw or felt a presence nearby and I would play along, partially because I believed in ghosts at the time, partially because I didn't want my goth license revoked and partially because it was fun. Once a woman crawled out of the water at the beach at night and meandered around. She didn't notice us, I was told, but we should stay away from that area. I picked up a ghostly passenger in my car when driving down a road with an old cemetery and houses that are too close to the road, making them prime spots for hauntings. One evening I heard a big bump on the roof of my car. Her answer? An unexpected visitor, probably some kind of demon. Of course, that means a walk through the graveyard would have its own share of spooks and specters, and like any psychically sensitive goth, she would tell me all about them. There were some regulars, who didn't mind our being there and would even get up to shenanigans of their own. Then there were more malicious spirits whose dwelling places were off limits. We can't go over there, she would say, those ones don't like us. Obviously, the spirits would be much more active at night. So it was a hard rule that we never stay there after the sun goes down. Well, one time we were doing our goth thing, walking around, pretending to see ghosts, when she absolutely had me convinced that the malicious spirits were everywhere. Every noise I heard, every shadow cast in the moon, I was sure was a malicious spirit that was going to strike me down where I stood. I don't remember many details, except for her warning that it wasn't safe and that we were being attacked. The spirits were angry that we were desecrating their sacred place with our presence after dark. This place is for the dead and the living are not allowed. Not only did she manage to have me running to the car, but she even gave me instructions as to how to placate them, among them blow them kisses. So that was just a tad over the line of suspension of disbelief. It was still fun though. That wasn't the only time either. On 2 separate occasions, once in the graveyard, once in her house, she acted possessed. I still am not completely sure if this was make-believe or some sort of mental disorder. Completely changed her demeanor, mannerisms and character and acted like another person entirely. Would be very vague in responses to any questions, would insist I was calling her by the wrong name and give obscure clues as to who she was. She would eventually get bored, but one night she kept the facade going for hours. It was quite the performance. If I remember correctly, I think one time she was vacillating between 2 spirits, one who liked me and one who did not. It was probably just a game she was playing, but if I'm honest, that one was pretty scary. To this day I'm not sure how much of this was her honestly thinking she was seeing ghosts and whatnot and how much was just a game. But looking back, it was probably all a game, just a way to have fun playing make-believe. I'm pretty sure she makes props for horror movies now, so I think it got her a lot of goth points. My goth license was revoked sometime in the mid-2000s, but every now and then I get a goth day pass. You have to provide a good justification, like if you're going to see The Cure or Cradle of Filth or something. Except for Halloween, everyone gets a free goth day on Halloween. My grandmother had 100 acres of woods to her name growing up. We lived in the mountains of Pennsylvania. I used to run around the woods unsupervised. One day I decided to get headed back to the house because it was just dark enough that I couldn't see too far, and my hair on my neck raised. Two things happen at once. There's a type of quiet that happens sometimes in the woods, or at night, where it feels like something bad might happen if you stay. Suddenly the world felt so very quiet out of nowhere, like someone turned the volume on life down. And I don't know if there is a science explanation for it. When you're being watched, you feel it. I had that feeling. I heard what sounded like walking getting closer to me, the crinkling of leaves and such, getting closer. But I couldn't see anything in any direction. I ran so fucking fast. It was probably just a woodland creature, but as a kid my brain was convinced I was about to die lol. A few years ago, I was walking my dog down a heavily forested area in the middle of the city. My city is weird, it has tons of green forested areas pretty much everywhere. The area we were walking is pretty much a human-made path. On the right of me a pretty shallow part of the river, you can walk out a solid 20-30 feet and it's just above your knee. To the left, a very busy bike path that connects to the whole city. Keep in my mind I can't see either. We were headed to an open part of the trees so I could take my dog on a river walk back home. We just walked the river until the beach and then I'm super close to my apartment from there. In maybe an hour walk away from my apartment, maybe 10 minutes to the open area to get into the water, when my dog just stops. She fucking loves her water walks, it's one of her favorite things in this world. My dog is a German Shepherd Husky mix, she's a big girl, so when she plants her feet, I don't have the strength to get her to move most of the time. But something was off about her just stopping. So stop, and I watched her. She stares into the trees ahead of us, without moving a muscle, just stares. I look, don't see anything, but I don't move. As we're both just stopped and staring at the trees ahead of us, I just see a wall of tree, nothing else. Her hair on her back stand up, slowly from her head to her tail. I ask her, sweetie, should we leave? Doesn't move. So I ask her again, this time turning to leave as I don't fuck around when she acts like this. I always believe her. She looks at me, and then back to the trees and lets out the most low guttler growl I've ever heard from her. She was ready to fight, so I made the choice to flight. I tell her okay, let's go. She just backs away slowly, doesn't turn around, so I let her keep my 6 in check as I lead us to the bike path through the trees. She kept turning around, and checking to see if whatever it was following us. I let her, and keep pushing us through the trees, mad-eyed to the bike path, and actually ran into a good friend and she relaxed a little. A few weeks ago by, we've gone through the area again, no issue. So I start asking my dog park friends what happened around the time she lost it. Yay, someone was murdered and someone found the body about 20 m after I left the area. She was probably facing down the murder on the other side of the trees. She's never let strange men near me, and she's very picky about the people in her life. Needless to say, I won't train this out of her. Not really bone chilling, but my high school used to have fire drills at least twice per month. One day, I was skipping a class and was sitting on the floor in the large stall of the washroom playing my svita when the smoke alarm went off. I didn't care too much for it and considered staying in the washroom for what I thought was a drill, but I had an odd heavy feeling come over and I ended up going outside with the rest of the kids. Turns out, someone had lit the toilet paper roll on fire in the boys' washroom directly next to me. It ignited obviously and caused over $10,000 in damage, filled the entire second floor of the school with smoke, and some of the fire reached the outside of the girls' washroom door. This happened on a Wednesday around 9 or so in the morning. School was closed on the Thursday and then we were back in class on the Friday, though a lot of kids and teachers went home early due to headaches caused by what I'm assuming was leftover fumes. That was in grade 9. 2 years later, I got a boyfriend, now fiancé, who eventually felt comfortable enough to tell me that he had been the one to light the bathroom on fire. I'd never brought it up before he mentioned it, and he never got caught because all the evidence was burnt lol. I wasn't even mad. I just had one question, why do it on a Wednesday? If you'd have done it on a Thursday, we would have got a long weekend. His response, it wasn't planned. He'd been messing around with a Zippo lighter and was burning toilet paper for some reason. But a kid came into the bathroom as one was lit, so being smart, he shoved the lit toilet paper back up into the plastic holder and left the bathroom. Not even 5 minutes later, the smoke alarm went off. One of my very good friends, 26 meters, and I, 27 meters, were going for a walk in the woods near his house years ago. It was a really nice early fall day and we were just talking, sharing a joint. Our destination was an abandoned neighborhood development deep in the woods, maybe a 20 to 25 minute walk, that had become fully overgrown and reclaimed by the woods. As we walked deeper into the woods, the path became less of a path and more of a suggestion, and the ground was getting soft. Which in my mind, as someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, implies humans don't ever travel this deep. But we're having a good time and getting goofy on that giggle grass, and my buddy being a photographer is looking forward to some cool shots of a place seldom visited by people. We finally reached the development and it looked like something out of Fallout or The Last of Us, a 5-house cul-de-sac of deteriorating mid-century 2-story homes that have become totally overgrown by bush and vines. Rooftops are caved in, and trees growing through walls, that sort of thing. Pretty cool, especially high. Anyways, the cul-de-sac is maybe about 30 to 40 feet from us, separated by some overgrowth no more than 2 feet high. I look around and spot some bones next to us in the clearing. As my last toasted brain cell struggles to return to attention, I notice piles of animal shit all over. Immediately I say to my buddy, "Hey, I think something lives here," and we're standing in its toilet. I look over to my buddy who isn't responding, but he's white as a ghost staring at the development. I walk up next to him and look where he's looking. To be honest, it looks normal aside from the abandoned building, but nothing strikes me as problematic. That is until I make eye contact with the thing sitting 30 feet away on a porch of an old house staring daggers into me. A fucking whole-ass mountain lion looking entirely unenthusiastic about us standing in its bathroom. I felt my heart sink into my stomach and down the back of my shorts. It was then I realized how high I was, because my first thought was, what does he want with us, as if we didn't walk into his house. I grabbed my buddy by the shirt collar and begin to hightail it out of there. I swear I've never ran so fast in my life, jumping over fallen tree limbs, missing every rock I could have tripped over, and not remotely fazed by the American Ninja-esque agility I wouldn't dare to attempt now. At least not sober and not in danger, lol. As we finally reached the clearing leading back to our car, we turned back and scanned the tree line. Still broad daylight, so it's sort of hard to focus our eyeballs into the shaded trees. But there it was, at the end of the path we just ran, staring at me. I felt like a piece of meat. Also, we dropped joint number 2 during our mad dash, so like that was tragic. It was like 2 to 3 a.m. I'm in the middle of Bufu, Midwest, long driving back home, and I needed to stop for gas. My dumbass decided to go to the nearest gas station in the middle of nowhere instead of going to a bigger, more well-known, and well-lit, kind of station. After getting gas, I fucked up trying to get back onto the interstate and drove down a road I was hoping would just lead me to an area where I could make a U-turn. Instead, this road kept going and suddenly became gravel road, and in my mind it's like, this is fine, it's a rural area, this is expected. But then my GPS/phone lost signal, BC in the middle of nowhere, and then I passed by an old run-down barn and saw another one up ahead, tall weeping willow trees hovering over the road, and realized I was surrounded by nothing but forest and tall fields. And I shit you not, it started to get foggy and I saw the moon was full. I noticed in the field there was another gravel road, and at that point I'm just too scared shitless to make a U-turn on the current road I was on. So I drove into the field and went far enough to where I could put the car in reverse and easily turn the car around and make my way back to the interstate. The nice thing about current cars having backup cams is that I can see where I'm backing up into while looking ahead of me in case some creepy shit jumps out at me. Lamau. Camping alone, 2015, in mid-north Arizona with my dog on a 3-day hike. I woke up in my tent to my dog growling and making sounds I've never heard a dog make before, and then I heard footsteps all around me. My dog was completely focused on the opening of the tent, with every hair on her body pointed straight up. I pulled out my gun and sat there holding my breath, listening to every sound like it was a novel for hours. I heard footsteps, whispers, and the wind in the trees, which made me even more frightened, thinking if the wind got too loud I wouldn't hear them unzipping my tent. I white-knuckled the handle of my gun until the sun popped up, and the footsteps stopped, and my girl calmed down. After about 2 hours of silence, I jumped outside, gun drawn, facing every direction. Once I was semi-confident, I packed up as fast as I could, still holding my gun and popping up every few minutes. I shoved as much as possible into my backpack, knowing without properly packing I would have to leave behind some things, left my collapsible chair and some collapsible pots and cups. My dog and I ran back the way we came until we reached a small town, where I called my mom, absolutely terrified, begging her to drive up and drive me to my car. I have some theories, like occult L, because they are a very real thing in Arizona and especially Arpin, where I was camping. Fully owe my life to my dog Kira. Her vicious snarls and growls I'm assuming made them think twice. Miss you, Kira. 2004 to 2018. I was working as a research technician for a Yale fire ecologist at Big Bend National Park in Texas. After flying out there from Connecticut, never been west of the Mississippi before that, we got started with our field work the next day. It was 8 a.m. and my boss was showing us how to set up the first of our vegetation plots. About 30 feet away a mule deer jumped out of the brush. "Oh cool," I said, looking over at the deer. About 1 second later, a cougar jumped out of a dry stream bed onto the back of the deer and ripped its throat out right in front of us. We noped out of there real fast. 1 week later, different area in the park, the other research technician and I are working in the backcountry. We're going about our day. He was measuring trees and other vegetation and calling out his measurements while I entered the data into our data logger. I turned around, luckily, and was looking in the eyes of a crouched cougar about 10 feet away ready to pounce and have me for a meal. I shouted to my coworker, dude, we've got a cougar here. What do I do? He replies in a thick Texas accent, just hoot and holler and throw acid at it. I did just that, threw some rocks at the big cat, yelled as loud as I could, waved my arms and made myself as big as possible. The cougar hissed at me, realized he didn't want to fight for his meal, and slunked off into the trees. I'm super thankful I didn't become cat food that day. No wonder they call the ranger station in the park Panther Junction. NATO bombing of Yugoslavia. They decided that news outlets and all related infrastructure were legitimate military targets. I had one pretty big building with pretty big broadcast antenna pretty close to me. We lived in a flat on 12th floor and had just one building between us and the military target. One night, around 1 to 2 a.m., I still couldn't sleep, so I came to the living room and found my mom watching TV. As I opened my mouth to speak, to ask permission to stay up some more to watch TV with her, I saw a fighter jet launch a missile behind her. All I could actually see through the window was something akin to a miniature sun that was born, and in a split second flew away. I started turning as soon as I saw it. Adrenaline hit me so hard and everything started moving so slow, I thought I was Flash for a second. In school we went through earthquakes and prepping for them, so I asked my parents about that and knew that the closest rooms to the core of our building, most likely to survive if anything else crumbled, were the bathroom and the toilet. I barely got one step towards them and the boom was felt and heard. I couldn't stop to look back, because the floor was shaking so violently, and the noise was so great, I thought that the building had already begun collapsing behind me. I got to the toilet, turned around, realized the building was still standing, rushed back to get my little sister, brought her back and waited on our parents to pick up pre-packed stuff for us to go and spend the night in a bomb shelter. Funnily enough, they either used wrong bombs or something, but the building just burned and some people died in the fires, but it remained structurally sound, and antenna was still semi-operational. On the second run, I was woken up by noise. My mother rushed in and said that they were bombing that building, again, and I responded with aha, okay then. And just went back to sleep. Was out camping. Could see smoke during the day and at dusk the sky was black from smoke. The direction the smoke was coming from was the only way in and out of our camping spot and we had to go kilometers towards the fire to get out. It was about 9 p.m. we made the call to leave. I was about 15 at the time. I remember it being dark and seeing the bushfire while we were still in the bush. Once we got out the fire was literally 50 meters away from the road where heaps of people were evacuating. Had we stayed in that camp spot for another 24 hours we would have been roasted. Too close for comfort. Ended up staying at some cheap motel 2 hours away where we knew the fire wouldn't go. That was pretty scary.